Jamaicans, here are the facts about NIDS. You will not go to prison for not having a national ID.
The Speaker at first.
Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we, thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that, we having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudice, and partial affections, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Honourable House now resume its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mr. Whittle. Mr. Whittle. Mr. Samuda. Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Wheatley, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Green, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Main, Mr. R. Scott, Mr. Azan, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brownberg, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Leslie Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Ms. Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson.
Members, please respond to your name.
Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Dr. McNeil, Ms. Nito, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Michael Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redmond, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Mr. Speaker, just on the matter of statement by Minister, the leader of government business and myself, we did discuss the agenda for the Parliament, and in fact, in the discussion with him, I inquired whether or not we would hear a statement from the Prime Minister today on the issue that has been swirling of Petrojam. And the member did say that there was not going to be a statement, but I know how these things go, so I was really anticipating, having regard, Mr. Speaker, to the absolute seriousness of this issue. And I know the Prime Minister is not here as yet, but I do intend to raise it when he gets here, just because I think the country is expecting to hear something today on this very, very important.
Mr. Paul, if when the minister comes, he has a statement. The leader of government and business will request suspension of the standing orders so that we return to that order. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Annual report and audited financial statements of the Jamaica Information Service, JIS, for the year 2016-2017. Annual report of the Child Development Agency for the year 2013-2014. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Ports Management and Security Limited for year 2016-2017. Planning Institute of Jamaica, PIOJ, publication on the Economic and Social Survey, Jamaica 2017. The Conch Export Levy Rate of Levy Order 2018 and the Conch Export Levy Rate of Levy Order 28 Resolution under the Conch Export Levy Act. The Emergency Number 2 Continuance Number 2 Resolution 28, the Emergency Powers Continuance Number 3 Resolution 2018 under the Emergency Powers Act.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Tweed.
Have been able to hear very well the list of announcements.
Order, please. I cannot
Could
hear the
one
member.
have a copy of the list, please?
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees. Notice of motion given orally.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Speaker. At our last meeting at the meeting before the last one, where I was present, the leader of government business had undertaken and in fact agreed with us for the appointment of another member to the PAAC to recreate the balance as reflected in the Parliament. I know that it was recorded. So are we going to be able to take that today?
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, he will move the following motion. The Conch Export Levy Act, the Conch Export Levy Rate of Levy Order 2018 Resolution. Whereas by virtue of Section 3(1)(c)(2) of the Conch Export Levy Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, the Minister may, from time to time, by order, prescribe the Conch levy to be paid under the Act. And whereas, on the 19th day of June 2018, the Minister made the Conch Export Levy Rate of Levy Order 2018. And whereas, it is provided further by
Sorry,
Section
on a point of order,
3.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I had raised a matter on the item just before, and you have moved on now.
Mr. Paul, you stand on a point of order?
Yes, yes. We have not concluded.
Hold a minute. The member is reading a motion under the topic notice of motion given orally.
Okay.
And you cannot debate that while she is doing that.
Mr. Speaker, there's no debate happening. There's no debate. Member, if you could just yield for me 1 second. I had raised an issue on the committee's report. Now, the member has moved on to motions.
Mr. Paul, do me a favor.
So, Mr. Speaker.
Just wait until she finishes the motion.
And we will recommit.
I'll hear you.
Yes, that's all I want to know.
Wait until she finishes the motion. I'll hear you. Go on, Mr. Sonis. Will you, on the motion given orally, you are speaking on giving a motion. Could you finish, please? Continue.
And whereas it is provided further by Section 3 of the Act that an order made under the section shall be subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives. And whereas it is desirable that the Conch Export Levy Rate of Levy Order 2018 be affirmed. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the Conch Levy Rate of Levy Order 2018 Resolution. 2. The Conch Export Levy Rate of Levy Order 2018, which was laid on the table of the House on the 26th day of June 2018, is affirmed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we are on notice of motion given orally. And if the member had been just a little more patient, he would have realized that I was coming to it. But I understand we are in some unusual times and every bit of exposure is important at this time. Okay. So, Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House I will move the following resolution. Motion. Be it resolved that notwithstanding the motion approved by the House, Honourable House on the 13th day of March 2018 outlining the composition of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee of this House, that the name Denise Daly be added thereto. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion.
Questions and answers to questions.
Mr. Speaker, I just wish to bring to your attention that we will be seeking a recommittal of notices of motion given orally to enable the Prime Minister to take the matter emergency powers continuance regulations when he arrives. Thank you very much.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House.
Mr. Speaker, we're on questions and answers to questions. The House Leader is going to get up and inform the House of the questions that will be answered today. He was about to get up and speak to that. You can't tell him when
you got information.
Mr. Speaker, return to questions and answers.
The agenda fits. Peter knows. You saw the agenda.
Mr. Bunting, you're aware, I am sure, of the standing orders, and you have before you the order of the day. We are on motions relating to sitting of the House. If you wish to go back to questions,
Mr. Speaker, by way of clarification, Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that we seem to have bypassed the item questions and answers to questions. So I wish to indicate that we will be having answers to questions today from the Honorable Prime Minister. And we will also be having answers to the questions asked of the Minister of Education, who is not in this House. So the Minister of State will answer those questions, Mr. Speaker. So you may wish to call on the Minister of State at this time to answer the question standing in the name of the member.
Mr. Samuda. Wait. Mr. Samuda. According to the rules of the Parliament, if we are to return to questions and answers to questions, you have to do it by a resolution. Because we passed that already. So you ask that we now return. We are at motions relating to sitting of the House. Mr. Semuda, we are at motions relating to sitting of the House. And if you wish us to go back to
Mr. Speaker,
questions and answers to questions,
Carl, just ask for a recommittal. Just ask for a recommittal.
no, there's no question there for me.
Wait, Mr. Paulwell. Have a seat.
Mr. Speaker, it has been brought to my attention that it was misdirected to the House Leader, but I am advising the Honourable House that the most appropriate member in the House to answer the question is the Minister of State in Education. 9. Question 9.
Those in favor of us returning to questions and answers to questions. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. Questions and answers to questions. Mr. Green?
No, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on a point of order. The question 10 is overdue for answering. The House Leader has made no mention of that. Question 10 is, I am to ask the Minister of Science, Energy and Technology a number of questions related to Petrojam. What a scandal that is deepening by the day.
Mr. Bunting.
It is
Mr.
overdue
Bunting.
for answering, Mr. Speaker.
You have a way of not recognizing the Speaker. And I am going to advise you that when I am called to speak to you, you are to recognize me and listen to me. On page 26, item 41, the responsibility of order in the House and committees. The Speaker of the House and the Chairman of the committee shall be responsible for the observance of the rules of order in the House and respectively. Their decision of any decision and decision upon any point of order shall not be open to appeal and shall not be reviewed by the House except by substantive motion. Mr. Bunting, I'm going to hear you at an appropriate time.
No,
I have called on Mr. Green.
No. Mr. Speaker.
I have called on Mr. Green to put a motion on the floor.
No.
Mr. Bunting, have a seat.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, answers to questions come after questions. And I'm asking on the point,
Mr. Bunting,
the order paper, we're on questions.
The Speaker is on his feet. Item 42 says the Speaker must be heard in silence. When the Speaker rises, you are to have a seat. I am not objecting to hearing you, Mr. Bunting, but I am going to go to the procedure of the House. And I'm saying that Mr. Green must now speak on the motion. After Mr. Speak, my pressure is very okay. After Mr. Green speaks, you may bring to the attention of the House. Whatever plan you have, Mr. Bunting. Whatever plan you have. The Speaker is still standing. The Speaker is still standing. Mr. Robinson, don't let me name you. I am on my feet. Mr. Green, proceed.
Mr. Speaker, the question has to be put. The question has to be put by Mr. Fagan, but yes. Mr. Green can't respond without the question being put.
Mr. Fagan.
Mr. Speaker.
Members.
Mr. Speaker, the member rose on the item questions and answers to questions to inquire as to whether or not the minister would be in a position to answer the question standing in his name. Mr. Speaker, I find that to be it's quite a normal request. So, however, Mr. Speaker, I am to advise the member that it is not possible to receive those answers today, but I give you an undertaking that it will be answered at the before this sitting of Parliament, prior to the completion of the sectoral debate, which is scheduled to close on July the 3rd, it will be answered.
You know,
I am not entertaining a debate at this time. I am calling on Mr. Fagan to ask his question and Mr. Green to answer it. When that is finished, I will entertain another point. Mr. Golden, please have a seat. Please have a seat. Please have a seat. Mr. Fagan, please ask your question. Mr. Green, answer, and after that, I will entertain.
Mr. Speaker, I'm simply rising on a similar issue, which is that there are a set of questions numbered 8, which I had asked of the Prime Minister in his capacity as Minister of Economic Growth and Job Creation. They were due on the 12th of June.
Mr. Golden,
they were due on the 12th.
Mr. Golden, you're a senior parliamentarian. I am on the item of Mr. Fagan answering question, and after Mr. Green is finished, that will be another item.
Thank you, Mr.
Members, I am going to follow the order. And whatever plans there is, you may carry on your plan. But I am not going to disregard this.
Mr. Speaker, please, Mr. Speaker, you have been hinting about a plan. Mr. Speaker, I do not think that as a chairman of this parliament, as Speaker, that you should be in, and it is entirely unparliamentary, that you should be saying that of the opposition.
I hear you.
You're impugning motive.
Can we proceed, please?
Yes.
I hear you. Mr. Fagan?
Mr. Speaker.
I hear you. I hear you. I have no such plan.
Mr. Speaker, I'm standing on a point of order. And the standing orders say that you are obliged to listen to the point of order.
Mr.
You don't make the standing orders, you preside over the House.
Mr. Bunting, what time do you...
I am speaking to the standing orders.
What time do you stand on a point of order?
It is not your discretion. This is provided for in the standing order 17.1.
Mr. Bunting, I'm going to ask you, allow the Speaker to run this place.
No, you don't run this place. No.
I'm running it by the standing order. I am running it by the standing order.
You don't run this place. The standing orders run this place.
Mr. Bunting. Have a seat, Mr. Bunting. The Speaker is standing. On page 26. On page... Order, please. Order, please. Members, the House is ready. The House runs under the standing orders. At this time, we are in questions and answers to questions. And Mr. Fagan is being recognized to ask Mr. Green the question. When Mr. Green is finished, we go on to other items, including what you are discussing. Mr. Fagan, will you stand and ask Mr. Green your questions? Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, when I start to get the answers, I was told and advised that the Minister of State could not respond to the questions in the House. And as such, I should direct it to the leader of government business. And I'd like for you to rule on this particular matter, Mr. Speaker, because I am not sure where is the correct. So can I be advised, Mr. Speaker? I wouldn't want to get the answers, and it is not properly recorded.
Mr. Speaker, I don't understand what is happening. The member asked questions and addressed them to the House Leader.
Not House Leader, Minister without portfolio.
Not even House Leader, Minister without portfolio. I am not in the Ministry of Education. So naturally, in order to facilitate the honourable member, I forwarded it to the appropriate authorities, which is the Minister of Education, who sits in another place. And he has asked that his Minister of State, who sits in this honourable House, answer the questions on his behalf. No, that is a simple matter of fact. It does not in any way compromise the content of the answer, nor does it alter the questions as asked. So I would ask that you implore on the member to simply rise in the hope that he can achieve what he set out to achieve, and that is answers to questions posed to me.
Mr. Speaker, I have gotten the guidance, and I'm going to follow. Would the Minister, the Minister which has responsibility for education answer the questions as listed in my name?
Minister Green. Order, please, on both sides.
Question 1, Mr. Speaker. Should any student who is unable or fails to pay a contribution to his or her school be excluded from any school activity? Response. The ministry since 2016 has implemented...
Mr. Speaker, the member is supposed to supply us with copies of the answers.
Just answer the question. Just boss. Why are you hiding the question? Why are you just you have copy?
You have a statement here? The ministry since 2016 has implemented a non-mandatory fee policy, and in its Bulletin 82 of 2017 and Bulletin 91 of 2018 to schools, the directive of this was explicitly articulated that, and I quote, students should not be denied from entering schools because of an inability to pay. The policy is that contribution cannot be mandatory and must not be a requirement for registration, school access, attendance, or criteria for graduation, examination slips, application to sixth form, or access to any public service at a public education institution. Question 2, if the answer to number 1 is in the affirmative, which contribution is mandatory? Response, there are no mandatory contributions. However, the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, together with the National Parenting Teachers Association of Jamaica, continues to engage and encourage all parents, once they are able to make a contribution approved by the boards, PTAs, and the ministry. Question 3. If the answer to number 1 is the negative, is the minister aware that the Cumberland High School students were excluded from sports and extracurricular activities if fees are not paid? Response. The ministry has followed up with the administration at Cumberland High School, and information provided states that no student has ever been excluded from participation in extracurricular activities due to non-payment of parent contribution fees. Cumberland High maintains a robust extracurricular program, which is guided by the Extracurricular Policy 2018. As a part of rebranding Cumberland High School, the implementation of extracurricular activities has formed an integral part of the school's academic program in furtherance of wholesome student development. All students are encouraged to take advantage of the opportunity provided to participate in one or more extracurricular activities made available by the school. There are 21 active clubs, including Red Cross, Media, Performing Arts, Boys Club, Girls Club, 4-H, Visual Arts, Mathematics, ISCF, Science and Environment, Cadets, JPS Energy, Spanish, Welding, and Grooming 101. The various clubs have organized programs and activities, and student members meet on different days of the week. Students are also given leadership role in these clubs and societies. The records from the school indicate that approximately 65% of the students who are members of these clubs and societies have not paid contributions. However, the leadership of the school insists that participation of students in clubs and societies is mandatory, despite their status. Membership in the clubs and societies at Cumberland High School is as follows. Red Cross, 40 students, Media Club, 10 students, Boys Club, 20 students, 4-H, 80 students, Visual Arts, 51, Mathematics Club, 54, ISCF, 16, Science and Environment Club, 39, Girls Club, 15, Performing Arts, 43, Cadets, 46, JPS Energy Club, 50, Spanish, 9, Debate, 10, Computer Club, 52, Tourism, 28, Welding Club, 15, Domino, 53, Girls Guide, 10, Grooming 101, 20 students. It must be noted that many students who are unable to pay participate in competitions in many sports, such as the Issa Manning Cup and Netball Championships, which provide avenues for exposure of their talents and overall personal development. The school indicated that there is no discrimination against students whose parents have not paid contributions. In fact, students have been benefiting immensely from the exposure offered by the extracurricular activities. For instance, the 4-H Club received 2 first-place awards at the parish level in window treatment and poster competition. The club was placed 3rd in the circumposing competition and the overall display competition. It is also noteworthy that Cumberland High School's enhancement programs were rated as good by the most recent report of the National Education Inspectorate submitted in January 2018. The ministry, therefore, has no evidence to substantiate this claim.
Mr. Speaker, nice spin. I really didn't. Mr. Speaker, I really didn't ask for a statement. I really wanted an answer to the question. And the question was whether or not the students were disenfranchised or were not able to participate in any of the extracurricular activity. You have named all of those activities which are not unique to Cumberland High Schools. In fact, most of these programs are in other high schools. And obviously, Mr. Speaker, you have gotten an answer to which you want to, you're anticipating that, yes, no student is left behind and all the students are paid. But I have enough evidence. I have enough evidence, Mr. Speaker. I have enough evidence, Mr. Speaker, to suggest and to show you that these students have not gotten an opportunity to participate in extracurricular activity because they would not have paid their fees. And many of those students, Mr. Speaker, are students who could have been on path. But because of the community, Mr. Speaker, because of the community, Mr. Speaker, many of the persons in the Portmore area, and in particular those areas, are unable to benefit from the PATH program, because when the officers come to check on their premises, they see things like television and they see things like refrigerator and so on. And so they are not able to get an opportunity to be on the PATH program. Mr. Speaker, I'm carrying on. And so, Mr. Speaker, many of those students who are unable to pay the fees to the school are not given an opportunity to participate in extracurricular activities. And it is not true. It is not true, Mr. Speaker, to say that these students are able to.
Mr. Fagan. Is a member, could you inquire of the member if he's through with his speech that he just gave? What is the question? Would you like to reiterate the questions that you have just asked?
And next question, Mr. Speaker.
No, what's the one you just asked? Can you recall the one you just asked?
I'm going to ask another question, Mr. Speaker. I'll follow.
Order. Would you like to advise this Honourable House and the member, the Minister, what is the nature of the question you just asked? No, I'm asking the member. Would you please?
Mr. Speaker, outside of those matters which I don't believe the answers are factual, I want to find out from the Minister if he's aware that many of the schools, especially those in my constituency of Southeast St. Catherine, I want to find out.
Mr. Fagan, ask a question.
I want to find out, Mr. Speaker.
Ask a question. Don't give me. Ask a question. Don't give me a debate. Ask additional questions.
Mr. Speaker, I want to find out from the member if he knows that a lot of the students are unable to collect their certificate or any document from the school after graduation because they are unable to pay the fees or fees are outstanding.
Right. Mr. Green?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I would say to the member in relation to the first point that he raised regarding having evidence. You know, I don't think we are adversaries on the point of if students are unable to pay, they should still be allowed to access education. So what I would suggest to the member, and I would also go a bit further than suggesting, one, if you have the information, in order for us to help each other, it would make sense that, one, you raise the issue regarding a specific student with the principal, firstly, where there is inaction, you raise it with the board chairman, and if there is still inaction, especially because we agree that students should be in school, you raise it with us at the ministry. You write us in specific terms indicating that this student is not being allowed to participate so that we can help each other in following up and ensuring that the policy directs. No, but it's important, and what I don't want for all of us, we want our children in school. So where you have, so, and we are not, if you realize what we have said, member, we have done our investigation and we have no evidence. Now, if you come with the evidence that we can then say to the board that we have evidence that the student is not being allowed, then we can act. To your second point, well, the answer goes to the second point, member. The policy of the ministry is clear. No student should graduate and because they are unable to pay the contributions, not be given the certificate. If, member, you come across, and I say this to all the members, if you come across situations that the students are not being allowed, please raise it with the ministry specifically, because that is how we can ensure that we intervene at the level of the board, intervene at the level of the region, to ensure that the policy is being adhered to.
Mr. Speaker, the request, as I had previously stated, the request by the member from Central Manchester with respect to the question standing in his name will not be answered today. And I have given an undertaking that it will be answered by the end of the sectoral debates, which is due to be completed on the 3rd of July. But they will not be answered today.
Mr. Speaker, am I allowed to
Mr. Bunting,
respond?
when a member is speaking, you are to either stand on a point of order or have your seat until the member finishes speaking.
I thought he was finished.
No,
Mr.
sir.
Speaker.
Will you have a seat and let Mr. Semuda finish? Or stand on a point of order, state a point of order, and if it's a point of order, then you proceed. Have a seat, Mr. Bunting.
Secondly, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Bunting, have a seat.
The member from Southern St. Andrew has a question at item question 8. And I am to assure him that it will be answered by the Prime Minister today. In addition, there is a question standing in the name of the member from Southeast St. Andrew at number 7, and every effort is being made to answer that question today as well, barring a little housekeeping cleaning up. But they will be answered today, even if we have to recommit the item and ask for an extension of question time. So they will be answered. Those two will be answered today. The member from Central Manchester will not have his question answered today.
Member. Mr. Speaker, do I have your permission to speak now, sir?
You are addressing the Speaker until you say what you're saying. I wouldn't know, but you have stand and the Speaker has recognized you. You may proceed.
Anyway, Mr. Speaker, I am standing on a point of order, 17A1, where it says a minister seeking to defer answering a question shall hand to the clerk a written request, therefore, which explains the reasons why the answer could not be supplied in the time required. And if the House is satisfied with the explanation, the House may extend the time. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't think you can determine whether the House is satisfied unless the members, and in particular the member who asked the question, is allowed to speak on the issue. So I am rising to speak consistent with Standing Order 17A1.
No, Mr. Bunting, you ask a question after Minister. Am I correct?
Yes, I did.
The Minister is saying that the question will be answered later. Is that... Huh?
He said it will be answered before the end of the sectoral debate.
I'm going to ask Mr. Samuda to give us a date. I don't want to hear at the end of sectoral debate. I want a date. Question has been long standing, and the House wishes to get a date when the question will be answered. Have a seat, Mr. Bunting. Let Mr. Samuda advise me.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not in a position to give a specific date. I've given a timeline. That is what I said, and that is what I meant. What is important to the member is that He can read all the standing orders he wishes. He will not get an answer to his question today.
Mr. Speaker, no, Mr. Speaker, please, you are not supposed to interpose. You should be neutral.
Have a seat, Mr. Semuda.
You are obliged to be neutral.
I'm not satisfied with that.
Mr. Speaker,
You know if you know when the sectoral debate is going to finish. I've told you that. July the 3rd. And I've said that the question will be answered by July the 3rd, and that is what it is going to be, Mr. Speaker. I'm only in the position to advise you in that manner.
On July 3rd?
July the 3rd, within the time frame of June the 26th and July the 3rd, is when it will be answered. If he wishes to extract it at any earlier date, he may feel free to pursue that. But I'm not aware of any remedy that will befall that attempt.
Mr. Bunting, the Speaker is addressing you.
Mr. Speaker.
Have a seat. Let me address you, please.
Mr. Speaker, in accordance with the
Mr. Bunting,
yes,
you
Mr.
have a way of not hearing me. And I believe you deliberately not hearing me. I am addressing you. Have a seat. Mr. Samuda has advised that your questions will be answered on the 3rd of June, which I think is the next sitting, at least the second sitting. And I am holding him to that. I want dates, and I'm getting that your question will be answered on the 3rd of June. I cannot entertain a debate on your questions.
No, Mr. Speaker.
I will not entertain a debate on your questions.
Mr. Speaker, I am standing in accordance with 17A1, and I would just ask you to refresh yourself on that, because it requires that the House be satisfied with the explanation. The House, not just the Speaker. And I would like to say, as is my right as a member elected to come here, that I am not satisfied with this explanation, and I will tell you why.
Mr. Bunting.
Mr. Speaker, please allow me, please. I have tried to give you all the respect, but I think it is only fair. No, Mr. Speaker, I am not sitting. I am not sitting. It is only fair. Your responsibility as Speaker is to be fair and balanced in giving equal time to government and opposition in this House.
Have a seat.
And I am not. No, Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker. We're not sitting down. We're not sitting down because you're not being fair and balanced. And we're not sitting down. We're not sitting down.
I am very well.
We're not sitting down.
I'm very well aware of the plan. I am very well aware of the plan. That you'll be walking out, and so you can proceed. It doesn't bother me.
We're not walking
I am saying, if all members want to disregard the Speaker standing, you may do so, and I'll name all of you.
No, we're not sitting down. No. Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Bunting, have a seat.
No, I'm not sitting down, Mr. Speaker, because you have been muzzling me. I'm not sitting down.
Allow the member to speak.
On page 26, item 42.
No.
When the
Standing
Speaker
Order
of
17A1
the House stands during the debate, any member then speaking or offering to
this is
speak
not a debate.
can
This
sit
is
down.
question and answer to question. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the standing orders is what this parliament has decided is to govern the operations of this House, not the random discretion of a speaker. And the standing orders says that if the House is satisfied with the explanation, and you cannot determine if the House is satisfied with the explanation unless you allow members to speak, and they say whether they are or they are not. And I am saying that I am not satisfied with the explanation, and I'm going to explain why. I'm not satisfied with the explanation because the minister has had 1 month to come up with these fairly straightforward, factual answers.
Mr. Bunting,
I'm not satisfied with this explanation because you, Mr. Speaker, you and I were at a parliamentary workshop this morning,
the Hansard
a seminar
not to record
on the
what you are saying.
Of parliamentary democracy.
Hansard, do not record what Mr. Bunting is saying.
A fundamental element of parliamentary democracy is parliamentary oversight. And the first plank of parliamentary oversight is questions by parliamentarians for ministers who are responsible for parliament. And if we continue to allow the contempt and disrespect of this House by ministers just deciding whether or not they want to answer, then we will continue to devalue this parliament in the eyes of the public.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Bunting,
and you, Mr. Speaker, have a responsibility to be neutral.
I'm going to advise you.
To be neutral as presiding officer.
Mr. Speaker.
Every time I get up in this House, you jump on me and you try to vote me. And I'm not standing for that anymore.
I'm calling the attention of the leader of the House.
So,
Mr. Simuda.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
So,
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, point of order.
You're obliged to listen to me in this House.
Arise on a point of order.
No, I am already on a point of order.
Arise on a point of order.
Until I'm allowed to finish my point of order.
Arise on a point of order. You're not a point of order.
And I'm not sitting down.
Mr. Speaker.
I am on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, and I am not sitting.
I draw your attention.
Wait until I complete my point of order.
Mr. Speaker.
No, I am not sitting down.
Mr. Speaker, you need to listen to me.
Mr. Speaker.
Standing order 42, 43, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Standing orders on 42 and 43.
Mr. Bunting, you are on your feet, and Mr. Warmington has tried on a point of order. Have a seat. Have a seat, Mr. Bunting.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I am on a point of order.
No, it's going too far now.
I'm not sitting down until I'm allowed to be finished my point of order. You can't supersede me with a point of order. So sit down.
Hold on.
Hold on. I'm not sitting down. I'm not sitting down.
Mr. Speaker.
I have sat down enough times and I'm not sitting down here again.
This type of disrespect was never ever shown.
Until I'm allowed to finish my point of order, I'm not sitting down.
Mr. Speaker. This type of disrespect has never been shown to a former Speaker, Michael Pierce. Never. Never.
Because I am not yielding here today.
Mr. Speaker, use your authority and authority. It's a name limit.
Have a seat, Mr. Warmington. I want to advise members of the House that not only do we have visitors, we have the world watching us. We have the world watching us. And our order, please. Have a seat, Mr. Samuda, please. Our behavior here today is worse than it was the other day. Mr. Bunting, you have not
You have not listened to the speaker.
Let the member speak. 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 Let the member speak.
Show me where in the standing order you're speaking from.
Let the member speak.
Show me where in the standing order you're speaking from.
Let the member speak.
Show me. I am ashamed of you all. I'm ashamed of your behavior.
Shame on you.
And the country is ashamed of your behavior. And I want to disassociate myself from your behavior. And if that is the way you act as parliamentarian, you should be ashamed of your problem. And I'm asking parliamentarians to have a seat. Let me speak. Have a seat.
No, not
I am standing, and according to the standing order, you have to have a seat. Leader of the opposition. I am calling on the leader of the opposition and the leader of the House.
He was on his feet. You're not fair.
Speaker.
You cannot address me when everybody is standing.
Mr. Speaker. I'm going to do that. Mr. Speaker. Huh? Yeah, man. Hold on. Mr. Speaker, since you're... Well, let me ask the members to sit so I can speak to you. Mr. Speaker. Okay.
Members, order please. I accepted to be Speaker of this House because members agreed to cooperate in the interest of the country. We are abiding by the standing orders. Order, please. Mr. Bunting has disobeyed the Speaker. I am asking the leader of the opposition
Mr. Speaker.
Before I do what I have to do.
Me to say something. And Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that if the presiding officer of the House seeks the respect which he ought to get, then he must also show respect to the members of the House. And it would seem, Mr. Speaker, that the way in which the House is being presided over does not offer that respect to the members of the opposition. Repeatedly today you have made reference to some plan, imputing motive to the members of the House, which is specifically objected to in the standing orders.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask on what item is the member speaking? On what item is he speaking? Leader of opposition does not entitle you to get up and speak as you have a mind.
It is
the permission of the House.
It is the Speaker invited me to speak. So would you please, maybe your powers of recall have waned.
I don't know what item you're speaking.
Maybe because your powers of recall have waned. But let me say this. Mr. Phillips.
He has no privilege to stand and speak at will.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Phillips.
The matter
Mr.
is...
Phillips.
Mr. Speaker.
I have not invited you to assault the Speaker in the House.
Mr. Speaker.
And you know that you are doing something wrong. You're a
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
And I'm going to
allow the leader of the opposition after he has paraded in this disgraceful way, and allow him to get up and give a grandstand speech. It's out of order. Out of order.
Mr. Speaker.
You can all bow down to him. Don't matter to me. And take your campaigning somewhere else. You want to lead, go somewhere else with it.
Mr. Speaker, common sense and a modicum of knowledge of history would suggest that the business of the House can only proceed if we have some measure of respect for each other and if we have some measure of cooperation. We all, Mr. Speaker, we all are governed by the standing orders of the House, as you have said, and we are governed by the Constitution of the country. It is the case, Mr. Speaker, that because of the repeated disregard of the standing orders, the structures of accountability in the country and which are centered on this parliament are being eroded. Questions are not being answered.
Mr.
Parliamentary committees are not being appointed. We are not getting any statement of accountability in the face of the greatest number.
Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker.
You know something, I expect better from you.
Mr. Speaker.
The country expects better from you.
I am pleading with you, Mr. Speaker.
No. The country expects better from you.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Phillips, you are not doing yourself any favor. You are not doing yourself any favor.
Mr. Speaker, the rules of discussion don't require that you have to agree with me, but the rules of politeness require that you hear me.
No.
That's all that is required.
No.
You can then, after you have heard, you can disagree.
I hear you on
but the point is, Mr. Speaker, let me explain. We on this side are not going to be hectored, bullied, treated as if we have no right to be here. We came here on the instruction of constituents who are citizens of Jamaica and who we answer to.
Mr. Phillips.
I'm not saying you are blessed. What I am saying is that you need to allow the standing orders to speak, for you to simply to say to the member in contravention of the standing orders that he must take your answer, that he will not get an answer, irrespective of whatever he's doing. It's not only wrong, it is in breach of decency and it is in breach of the standing orders of the House. It's not the first time it has happened. Time after time after time. Questions in this House have come. And now we have reported. You can't make me sit down. You can't make me sit down.
Have a seat, Mr. Have a seat. Mr. Bunting, your behavior in this House today is unacceptable. Your behavior in this House is unacceptable.
I'm going to go on to the next item. But I'm going to advise you that if you continue, we'll have to name you in this house today. Mr. Samuda. Mr. Samuda, proceed.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker. What did you ask of me? Would you advise me? What did you ask?
What item are you on?
You asked me to name a member?
No, I don't need to name a member.
I can't hear you. Put the mic, there's something.
We are on item, Mr. Samuda. We are on motions relating to the sitting of the House.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, we have not disposed of the item. We have not disposed of the item, questions and answers to questions. I was on my feet when I was interrupted.
Motions relating to sitting of the House.
Mr. Speaker, we're still on questions and answer to questions.
Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained.
Mr. Speaker, you said that we are to address you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Hold on a minute.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, it is now beyond 3:20, and I believe we should ask for the suspension of standing order for us to continue with question and answer to question. Time being 3:45, Mr. Speaker. We cannot proceed. We cannot proceed with question and answer to question unless we have the suspension of standing order.
So, Mr. Speaker, the member has moved a motion, and I want, yes, well, Mr. Speaker, I am moving the motion that the item question and answers be allowed to be taken after 3:15 today. I so move.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Paulwell, you're well aware of that.
Mr. Speaker.
Proceed, Mr. Samuda.
Mr. Speaker. Hold on. Mr. Speaker. I gave notice earlier that we will be today answering question number 7 and question number 8. We were not in a position to answer those immediately because there were some minor housekeeping items to attend to. Obviously, for those who wish to deduce logically, at the time when those are to be answered, we would ask for a recommittal of the item, questions for answers, after getting the House's permission to sit to ask questions beyond 3:20. So in the interim, I am suggesting to you, Mr. Speaker, that we proceed down the order paper to public business. Eventually.
have proceeded.
Yes,
and
we don't make nonsense about recommittal.
Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Mr. Samudo, public business.
At public business today, Mr. Speaker. What do you mean? No.
Mr. Phillips, have a seat. Have a seat, Mr. Phillips.
What would you like to do?
Member, have a seat. The member is on the floor. The member is on the floor.
What is the point of order?
We are on public business.
Mr. Speaker, a few months ago, Mr. Speaker, you in this House, when we had the same difficulty of ministers answering questions, gave your word sitting there in that seat, Mr. Speaker. Why don't you be quiet? Why don't you be quiet?
Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Phillips, the world is watching you. The people in the audience watching you. We have passed that item.
It cannot be,
we
Mr.
are
Speaker.
Public business.
I have 3 questions. Question 11, 12, and 13 standing in my name. That should have been answered today also. I have not heard anything on it. But you, Mr. Speaker, gave your word in that seat there, Mr. Speaker, a few months ago, that you are going to ensure that questions be answered on time. And from time, and since then, Mr. Speaker, you have not held your word. But yet still you come to muzzle us on this side, Mr. Speaker, which is unacceptable.
Okay, Mr. Phillips.
So, Mr. Speaker.
That is enough for the Speaker. Speaker, hear you.
I can't hear you, Mr. Speaker. I can't hear you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to assure you that I'll be giving you dates when the questions will be answered.
No, but Mr. Speaker, it constantly happens.
You have to sit when I'm speaking, you know. Have a seat, have a seat.
You see, you're afraid to shut up the member on that side, but it is okay to muzzle me. Shut him up, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Warmington, please.
I'm on my speed speaking. Shut up the member.
Mr. Phillips, have a seat, please.
But I'm not completed, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Phillips, if you disregard the Speaker, you are not going to get what you are saying recorded. And that is not you. Please have a seat, please. I am saying to you, you ask a question.
Mr. Speaker, I just like you and the other members on this side is frustrated when we can't get the answers to the questions that we ask. And it is constantly being, we on this side is constantly disrespected from members on that side, Mr. Speaker. I am sent here just like all of us inside here to be able to ask the ministers and ask members in the House questions. Ever since we have started this new parliament in 2016, Mr. Speaker, you yourself have disregarded the standing orders and allowed them too much leeway.
Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, please have a seat.
No, Mr. Speaker, but I'd like an answer when
please
will
have
I
a
get
seat, Mr. Phillips.
No, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Phillips, I am not going to entertain you discussing an item that is not being discussed at this time. The Leader of Government has advised you that at a later stage today, we are going to return to the item of questions. I'm not going to entertain a debate on that. I have announced public business. I'm not going to discover debate on questions.
But Mr. Speaker.
And I'm going to ask you, Mr. Phillips, live up to your standard.
No, but Mr. Speaker.
Do not bring the
Mr. Speaker. I have asked I just need an answer. When will the questions tabled in my name? When will they be answered? That's all I'm asking, and you're behaving as if I'm asking I out or have a question.
Well,
They will be answered within the same time frame that I gave the member from Central Manchester. Your questions are due for answering today. It will be answered. You weren't here earlier when I said that the sectoral debate ends on July the 3rd, and between now and then they'll be answered.
But you did not specify to the questions that I asked. You specified to other questions. I have question 11, 12, and 13 standing in my name.
I have seen them.
So I'm just seeking.
So I'm saying questions on the order paper standing in your name.
But it would be good for you, though, if you allow me. It would be good for you as leader of government business to ensure and help the speaker then, since the members do not honor what is in this. It would be good for you to be able to help them, that they answer them on time.
They will be answered within the time frame I enunciated earlier. Now don't calm down. So, Mr. Speaker, I am now inviting you to invite the member from Northeast St. Anne, the Minister of Local Government and Social and Labor and Social Security, to make her presentation.
The Minister of Labour and Social Security. Minister of Labour and Social Security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, allow me to give thanks to God Almighty for his mercies. They are renewed every morning. I want to begin by expressing gratitude to the Prime Minister and to my colleagues on both sides of the House for the tremendous support and encouragement provided to me over the past 2 years, and in particular during the last financial year. The success of this ministry, Mr. Speaker, owes a great deal to the dedicated and committed staff at the Ministry of Labour and Social Security, and some of them are here today in the gallery supporting me. I must thank the team who have carried out their task with diligence and purpose, knowing very well that their work forms part of a much greater effort in bolting the foundation for lasting prosperity through dignity and respect for the people of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, I sit in this honourable House because of the privilege granted to me by the people of St. Anne Northeast and the tremendous work of my 4 councillors and executive members of the constituency. I would also like to thank our various partners, the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the International Labour Organization, the U.S. Department of Labour, the Jamaica Employers Federation, the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, and other private sector and civil society groupings for their support in making our work possible. Mr. Speaker, since my last sectoral presentation, a member of our dedicated team, Mr. Gresford Smith, who served as Chief Technical Director and later as an advisor in the ministry, was laid to rest. His contribution to the development of labour relations in Jamaica has been indelibly etched in our minds, and for that, we know that we owe him a debt of gratitude. This year is of great significance for all Jamaicans, as it marks the 180th anniversary since emancipation and the 80th anniversary of the 1938 Labour Uprising, which resulted in the establishment of the Labour Department, which later became the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. Mr. Speaker, the policies and programs of the ministry have consistently sought to contribute to national development through the provision of efficient and effective labour and social security services. This year, we are moving to bolt the foundation we have laid over the last 2 years so that the prosperity that we all desire can be achieved with the dignity and respect for all Jamaicans. Mr. Speaker, we have completed our strategic business plan for 2018-2019 through 2020-21 and have paid careful attention to the implementation of policies, programs, projects and initiatives that will enable us to achieve our mandate. Greater emphasis will be placed on positioning the Ministry of Labour and Social Security so that it plays a more integral role in increasing employment prospects for job seekers and providing social protection for vulnerable groups in the society. This means that our priorities will be centered around increasing workplace productivity, increasing employment within the context of the decent work agenda, enabling a more efficient labour market, maintaining a harmonious industrial relations climate, providing a safe and healthy work environment, and protecting the most vulnerable groups. Mr. Speaker, public sector transformation is an imperative that I endorse. As a ministry, we must be moved to put greater scrutiny on our public officials to ensure that the connection between the effective management of our public accounts and fiscal affairs are maintained. Let me pause here to comment on the reported instances of financial irregularities within the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. We are cognizant of the reports of the Auditor General. So it is my responsibility as Minister to ensure that public funds are used for the purpose for which they are intended. So we are working with the relevant state agencies responsible for investigating these matters, and I wish to assure the public that measures have been introduced to improve internal accountability to ensure fiscal prudence and transparency. And Mr. Speaker, let the chips fall where they may. Contribution to economic growth through increased productivity. One area in which we will be focusing a great deal of attention over the next 3 years is the business of productivity. Mr. Speaker, increasing productivity is necessary for sustainable economic development, competitiveness, job creation, and prosperity. The nation's understanding and awareness of the importance of productivity improvements and its contribution to economic growth is not fully appreciated, and hence the Ministry will be stepping up its game to enhance the awareness over time. The Ministry, through the Jamaica Productivity Centre, will therefore be ramping up our public awareness campaign so that every employer, every employee, in fact, every Jamaican will appreciate the connection between productivity and economic growth. The JPC will also be assisting individuals, firms, and organizations to become more productive through training and technical support. A strong emphasis will be placed on the adoption or adaptation of innovation as a driver of productivity. Mr. Speaker, for the first time, 2 private sector organizations, the Gleaner Company and Lasco Distributors, have joined forces with the Jamaica Productivity Centre to promote productivity in schools, along with the formation of productivity clubs in high schools. This is a very important development, as it recognizes that if we inculcate a strong productivity culture in our students, it will grow with them through life. So I'm pleased to inform this Honourable House that the Japan International Cooperation Agency has provided the JPC with an expert on quality and productivity for the next 2 years. This is a welcome development, as it will allow the Centre to add quality to its productivity portfolio. Mr. Speaker, on the 17th of May 2018, the JPC launched the first of 4 productivity fora planned for this fiscal year. The first forum was held as part of the Workers' Week activities under the theme, Ramping Up Productivity Through Innovation. I invite members, our ministries, departments and agencies, and the business community to participate in future productivity fora, as this is an excellent way to build prosperity through productivity. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to announce to this House that this year marks the 75th anniversary of the U.S. Overseas Employment Program. This relationship represents one of the finest examples of U.S.-Jamaica cooperation. I wish, on behalf of the government and people of Jamaica, to commend our partners for their sterling contribution to the program. The U.S. Overseas Employment Program has over the years been beneficial to both employers and Jamaicans alike. I can safely say that through this program, the social and economic conditions of our Jamaican workers and their families have been significantly enhanced. The country has also benefited significantly from the remittances and through the transfer of knowledge and work ethics. Mr. Speaker, we intend to celebrate this anniversary whilst at the same time exploring opportunities for growing the program. for the 2017-2018 financial year, 15,914 Jamaicans were placed in employment overseas in the United States and Canada. Mr. Speaker, of these persons, 9,366 were placed in the Canadian labour market and 6,548 in the U.S. agriculture and hospitality sectors. The Canadian program continues to grow steadily, and for the first time last year, 69 women were recruited for the USA agricultural program. I must report that the ladies did exceedingly well and will be returning this year. After more than 20 years, 150 cane cutters were placed in jobs in Florida. Mr. Speaker, through our liaison service in the United States and Canada, we are working to secure more jobs and, importantly, the welfare of our workers. We are also in discussion with the Dalhousie University, who has offered to assist us in the training of farm workers to ensure that they are better equipped to work on Canadian farms. We continue to improve our facilities to serve our farm workers with dignity and respect. In the last financial year, approximately $15 million was spent renovating the dorms and processing facilities at East Street. This year, we are committed to improving the medical and other office areas at the location. The Ministry will be further strengthening its capacity to provide local employment and related services to job seekers, employers, and the general public. This will be undertaken through the Electronic Labour Exchange Unit. Since April 2017, approximately 1,092 persons have been placed in local employment by the unit. This represents an increase of 20.5% over the previous year. The feedback obtained through the 2017 labour market survey conducted by the Ministry indicated that there is a lack of soft skills among the youth entering the labour market. This has encouraged us to conduct employability skill sessions for young persons to prepare them for the world of work. A total of 66 such sessions were conducted during 2017-2018 financial year, and the commitment is to conduct at least 75 sessions before the end of this financial year. Mr. Speaker, there are some areas in which I would like to make a few comments in response to the misguided position of Member Daly in his presentation to this Honourable House a few weeks ago. Let me, however, remind this House of the progress realized under JLP administration since we took office in 2016. The records have shown, Mr. Speaker, that the construction industry has grown, the BPO sector has grown, we have experienced increase in growth in GDP, and we have created thousands of jobs. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, the rate of unemployment has fallen to 9.6%, the lowest in decades, and the rate of poverty has fallen by over 4%. Mr. Speaker, the impression given by Member Daly is that the Ministry is giving preference to foreign nationals over Jamaicans with regard to the allocation of jobs. I want to make it clear, Mr. Speaker, that this administration does not see workers as a commodity, and hence we value our Jamaican workers and hold them in high esteem. It was the Jamaica Labour Party under His Excellency the late Sir Alexander Bustamante which sought to give relevance to the Jamaican workers and which ultimately led to the labour riots of 1938. This, Mr. Speaker, was to see the beginning of a buoyant labour movement. It did not happen in a vacuum. It came with a price. It is a part of our legacy, and we intend to protect it. And we will also do so. And we will do so through the protection of the rights of our Jamaican workers. Mr. Speaker, let us look at the figures against the background of what was said by my colleague, Member Daly. There were no significant increases in work permits granted between 2014 to present. Between 2014 and 2016, there was an average of 4,600 work permits being granted. In 2017, a total of 5,721, which is the biggest increase, work permits were granted. This figure represents new permits and renewals. Mr. Speaker, we are all aware that in 2017, the Alport plant was reopened. Construction of the LNG plant and the port expansion significantly impacted the overall numbers of permits issued. Many of these permits were issued for short periods ranging from 3 to 6 months. Mr. Speaker, the signs of prosperity are all around. The projection is that there will be 15,000 new hotel rooms by 2021, with several projects well underway already. Significantly more projects than when the other side was over here. Road construction is happening on a scale that at a pace never before experienced by Jamaican citizens. Yet, Mr. Speaker, there has been no significant increases in the number of permits granted to these companies. In fact, the highest number of permits granted in the area of construction during the period was in 2015, when 1,127 permits were granted, compared to the period's average of 956. So you have granted more work permits in the construction industry than we have. Mr. Speaker, even with the addition of several hundred new hotel rooms, there has roughly been a 1% increase in the number of permits granted within the tourism sector. Member Daly, you need to listen. Even with the addition of several hundred new hotel rooms, there has been a roughly 1% increase in the number of permits granted within the tourism sector. The opposition is disingenuous in its innuendos that this government has been facilitating the entry of droves of foreign workers into the local industry. The government, you are disingenuous with your innuendos that this government has been facilitating the entry of droves of foreign workers into the local industry. It is not so, and it could never happen under my watch. Mr. Speaker, the reality is that the exchange of labor, skill, and knowledge is not going anywhere. Just as Jamaicans seek to go overseas and work, persons will seek to come to Jamaica. While we can't promise to never issue another work permit, we at the Ministry of Labour and Social Security are committed to ensuring that priority is given to Jamaicans within the local labour force. Mr. Speaker, this government remains steadfast in its commitment to transforming the labour market. We acknowledge that labour market reforms have been the most widely used policy intervention by countries to bring about job creation and economic growth. Mr. Speaker, last week I tabled the Labour Market Reform Agenda report submitted by the Labour Market Reform Commission. I want to publicly acknowledge the government's deep appreciation for the work of the members of the Commission, led by Dr. Marshall Hall, and assure them that we have already begun implementing a number of the recommendations. Some of these recommendations have far-reaching implications and will require further analysis to determine the most appropriate strategy for implementation. I wish to assure the Parliament and people of Jamaica that the government is committed to ramping up our efforts to make labour market reform a reality. The 2017 National Labour Market Survey conducted by the Ministry of Labour and Social Security demonstrates the government's effort to provide evidence-based research from industry level about the quantity and quality of human capital in the Jamaican labour market. It is also intended to provide training and educational institutions with data to inform their programs and curricula. Our task at the Ministry, Mr. Speaker, is to work closely with training institutions to provide a better match between the skills demanded by the workplace and the supply of graduates with these skills. Last week, we tabled two very important studies, the Ministry's second report on labour market trend and prospects for employment in Jamaica, and the employment opportunities for low-skilled workers in Jamaica. The trend report looks at the performance of key labour market indicators as well as the availability of employment in growth sectors such as the business process outsourcing, tourism, the creative industries, animation and film, construction, manufacturing, and energy and mining. The low skills report shows that globally, low skilled workers are needed to give office and administrative support to companies and to perform in other areas such as production, fast food preparation, sales, building, and ground maintenance and transportation. Mr. Speaker, these reports are available on the Ministry's website, and I hope that everyone would have had the opportunity to visit the Ministry's new and improved website. In keeping with the technological age and to meet the changing needs of our clients, we intend to launch a labour market information system app by the end of 2018. This initiative will allow employers to register their vacancies and for job seekers to register their resumes. I want to say special thanks to the 135 employers who registered on our system at the recently held Jamaica Expo. This is an indication of the confidence that our stakeholders have in the Ministry and the steps we are taking to improve our services to them. Mr. Speaker, we are encouraged by the increase in the number of persons with disabilities who are now being employed by organizations across Jamaica. Data from the National Labour Market Study revealed that about 10% of firms surveyed employed persons with disabilities. The Ministry is playing its part in preparing persons with disabilities for the labour market. During 2017-2018 financial year, 76 students with disabilities were enrolled in various programs offered by the Abilities Foundation. 79 graduates were placed in 6-week paid work apprenticeship and 6-month work solutions. This was made possible through the Social and Economic Inclusion for Persons with Disabilities project, funded by the IDB, as well as assistance received through the Heart Trust, NTA, and the private sector. Mr. Speaker, with the help of our partners, we are bolting the foundation for lasting prosperity through dignity and respect for persons with disabilities. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security occupies a very unique place in government. In addition to our line function to develop and implement labour policies, we also have a horizontal function to ensure industrial harmony. The Industrial Relations Department of the Ministry continues to monitor the industrial relations climate in Jamaica and oftentimes work behind the scenes with employers and workers seeking consensus and mutual agreement between disputing parties in order to ensure that there is industrial harmony and industrial peace. The 2010 amendment to the Labour Relations and Industrial Disputes Act has resulted in a significant increase in the number of cases that have been reported to the Ministry. A large number of these disputes are brought by individuals resulting from a failure to follow due process. I am pleased to report that during the 2017-2018 financial year, the Ministry was able to resolve 70% of the reported industrial disputes. We will be further strengthening the industrial relations machinery through a series of seminars and workshops for labour officers to expand and improve the Ministry's capacity to respond to issues affecting workers and employers alike. The magnitude of cases being handled by the Montego Bay Regional Office has encouraged us to further the establishment of a division of the Industrial Disputes Tribunal in Montego Bay, St. James. We have recently found a location and should have the IDT Montego Bay Division up and running by the end of this financial year. I would like to acknowledge that the IDT West was conceptualized from 2005 by the then Minister of Labour at the time, Member Horace Daly. In the 2018-2019 financial year, we will be working to complete amendments to the Minimum Wage Act, National Minimum Wage Order, and the Employment Agencies Regulation Act to incorporate provisions related to the International Labour Organization's Convention number 189 on domestic workers. Mr. Speaker, we are bolting the foundation for lasting prosperity through dignity and respect for domestic workers. On the matter of employment agencies, if you will allow me to just divert a little and to comment on what has been taking place by unscrupulous employment agencies. The reports about poor people being scammed of their last dollar with the hope of getting jobs overseas have not gone unnoticed. We intend to increase our monitoring of employment agencies. Our website is updated regularly so clients can view those agencies that are licensed, and every Sunday there is an ad in the classified section of the newspapers warning persons not to pay monies to people purporting to be able to place them in job overseas. And the Ministry of Labour does not charge money to send people overseas. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry will be initiating a sensitization program to increase the knowledge and awareness of the agencies and their clients on the issue of human trafficking. We are also taking steps to amend the Employment Agencies Act to expand the range of breaches covered by the legislation and to allow for the application of stiffer penalty measures. Mr. Speaker, the National Minimum Wage Commission has completed its public consultation and submitted its recommendation to the Ministry. We have reviewed the recommendations. We have taken into account the stability of the Jamaican economy, the rate of inflation, and the economic circumstance of the workers, as well as the ability of the employers to absorb an increase. After careful consideration, the Cabinet has agreed to grant an increase in the national minimum wage and minimum wages for security guards. I'm pleased to announce, Mr. Speaker, that effective August 1st, 2018, the national minimum will be increased, moving from $6,200 to $7,000 per week. The minimum wage for security guards. The minimum wage for security guards would also be increased from $8,854 to $9,700 per week, or $242.50 per hour. These increases represent an increase of approximately 12.9% or 9.6% respectively. And once again, the minimum wage is just a guide. It is a minimum that employers cannot go below. So any employer who wants to pay more, they can do so. Mr. Speaker, I've just announced an increase in the minimum wage for security guards. But I must point out that numerous concerns have been raised, and we must therefore take a serious look at what is happening in the security industry. The issue of security guards continues to be a current issue and has been making the news pretty often, and it has been doing so for the last 30 years. I certainly do not expect the opposition at this stage to use the issue of security guards as a political football or for mere political expediency. I would like to make it clear also, Mr. Speaker, that I have reviewed the sectoral presentations made by the previous Ministers of Labour and Social Security, and between 2013 and 2015, I have them here with me. I did not see anything in relation to security guards. I also took the liberty to peruse your sectoral presentation, Member Daly, in 2007, and you didn't say one word about security guards. Yes, you were. I find it strange. So, Mr. Speaker, I find it strange, therefore, that it is only when this government is in power.
Will you allow me, please? Just point of all, let me just correct something. I didn't want to have to interrupt
Yes,
I didn't want to interrupt my colleague, but she said in my sectoral presentation in 2007. In 2007, I was not the Minister of Labour. In 2007, I was a Member of Parliament up to the time of the election. I was a Minister of Health. I left the Ministry of Labour April 1st, 2006. Okay.
Thank you for... Thank you. In 2005, your contribution in 2005, member, had nothing. You didn't say anything about security guards. So you didn't say anything, and I find it strange, therefore, that it is only when this government is in power that you see fit to raise the issue of security guards. Do not use it for political expediency. In my 2016-2017 sectoral presentation, I indicated to this Honourable House that I have initiated dialogue with various stakeholders in the security issue in the industry, with a view to finding an amicable solution to the ongoing concerns raised. Mr. Speaker, my resolve was and still is to adopt a win-win approach rather than resort to a confrontational one, which could be prejudicial to social dialogue and the relationship we now enjoy through the Labour Advisory Council. Mr. Speaker, the opposition, PNP, has eyes for security guards only when it is in opposition, and you will notice that in recent times they have started to talk about them again. Mr. Speaker, we are about consensus, not confrontation. We believe in fairness and equity. We believe in partnership, and we have confidence in the systems we have in place. Today, Mr. Speaker, in an effort to examine the issues raised having to do with security guards, I am recommending that a Joint Select Committee of Parliament be constituted in this Honourable House in an effort to once and for all deal with a matter which has been hanging around for almost 40 years. And I wanted to have the full involvement of all stakeholders, including my colleagues on the other side of this House. Mr. Speaker, there has been much talk about the JIC, and the discussions are centred on the construction centre. The Joint Industrial Council is not confined to any one sector. In years gone by, the JIC was active in a number of sectors in Jamaica. As we speak, there is a Port Workers JIC, which was established in 1952. There was one in the bauxite sector, but due to the downturn in that industry, it is no longer functional. The sugar industry also has one in place. But, Mr. Speaker, the JIC is a workplace partnership for employers and employees. It serves as a forum for management and unions representing workers to meet and decide on labour matters. As Minister of Labour and Social Security, I see it as a model for good industrial relations. However, its formation and continuity is voluntary. The Ministry of Labour and Social Security cannot enforce a JIC agreement on companies. These agreements are arrived at between members of the Council and companies, and companies are free to join or not to join the Council. Mr. Speaker, God help us if we were to seek to legislate the JIC or JIC rates in Jamaica. It is just not possible. This brings me to another matter having to deal with the fixed-term contracts. Mr. Speaker, to be speaking about workers working without the enjoyment of any retirement benefit is rather disingenuous of the opposition. The public sector in Jamaica is the only employment body which guarantees a pension after retirement, providing the worker is vested. This administration, Mr. Speaker, has sought to protect the workers from exploitation. Recently, we ratified Convention 189, which will guarantee household helpers with rights like any other worker. In 2010, we amended the Labour Relations and Disputes Act. Now workers can have their individual disputes heard at the tribunal. Previously, if a worker wasn't a member of a trade union, his matter could not be sent to the tribunal. The credit goes to the Speaker of this Honourable House for that landmark amendment to the LRIDA. Mr. Speaker, in 1962, we ratified Conventions 87 and 98. Convention 87 speaks to the freedom of association and protection of the right to organize, and Convention 98 speaks to the right to organize and collective bargaining. This, Mr. Speaker, is a testament of our commitment to protect the rights of our workers for over 56 years. This government does not encourage exploitation of workers, and trade unions are free to organize workers, and the ministry continues to facilitate the process of trade union representation and collective bargaining. The issue of fixed-term contracts has been going on from the 70s. Notwithstanding that, Mr. Speaker, I have noted the concerns, and as is customary for me, I will have consultation with the Labour Advisory Council on the matter. In relation to the matter having to do with the Joint Industrial Council, I will seek to have dialogue with other tripartite members. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I urge Member Daly to get his facts right and not to mislead the public and not to mislead not to mislead the public with utterances such as what he has presented in his contribution to the Honourable House. Jamaica is a signatory to the ILO Convention number 94, which speaks to labour clauses in public contracts. Mr. Speaker, whilst we have been signatories since 1962, we have not taken the appropriate steps to implement this convention. I'm pleased to report that through dialogue with the Ministry of Finance and Planning, the government's procurement guidelines, which are currently being revised, will ensure that labour clauses are included in government procurement contracts. I would like to acknowledge the work of the unions who made representation and had dialogue with us on this matter. Mr. Speaker, the government's strategic priority of creating an environment that is characterized by inclusive and sustainable economic growth, job creation and prosperity will be void if it excludes the promotion of decent work for our labour force. In keeping with this objective, a key outcome of the government's medium-term socio-economic policy framework includes the passage of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. The proposed act is aimed at securing the safety and health of all workers. The bill was tabled in Parliament during the 2017-2018 fiscal year. For the 2018-2019 legislative year, it will be given top priority. Mr. Speaker, the promulgation of the OSH bill into law will require us, as a ministry and a country, to have measures in place to ensure the smooth implementation of the provisions of the Act. We are well aware of the significance of the requirements of our tripartite stakeholders, government, employers and employees, under the proposed law. Consequently, as a ministry, we are taking proactive steps, and our focus for the future will be on the following: capacity building. It is projected, Mr. Speaker, that the OSHA will require a significant increase in our administrative and technical resources to monitor and enforce the requirements of the Act. This is extremely important, as it is projected that the Act, when promulgated, will result in an increase in the scope for the inspection and audit of approximately 130,000 small, medium and large enterprises. Already we are in consultation with the ILO to provide training for inspectors. The Ministry will also be embarking on a series of discussions with our training institutions to determine how best we can, on a consistent basis, fulfill the training needs for the human capital required. Mr. Speaker, we have already started the process of a national sensitization awareness program and have been engaging the stakeholders in private and public sectors across the country. However, we need to intensify this program. Starting in September, we are going to ramp it up. We will be going to the nooks and crannies of Jamaica, starting with town hall meetings. This sensitization, Mr. Speaker, will not only be confined to OSH, but will embrace other areas of the ministry: child labour, NIS, Industrial Relations, Disabilities Act, to name a few, as to who we are and what we do, and how our citizens can access our resources to advance their awareness and development. Mr. Speaker, we have a vibrant Labour Advisory Council, and I must say thanks to the support received from the tripartite members over the last 2 years, the Jamaica Employers Federation and Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions. The LAC has provided a platform for us to build consensus and make labour-related decisions in the interests of the country in a civil and reciprocated manner. Through the LAC, we will seek to continue to work together to ensure the preparation and smooth implementation of the proposed OSH Act. We invite civil society, NGOs and other stakeholders to come on board. The bill is on our website, and we welcome the dialogue and the support needed to make it a success. Employers have trained personnel in occupational safety and health. I encourage all employers to start the process of the training of these personnel, because this will make the transition much easier for all of us. All places of work under the new Act will be required to meet certification. In this regard, I beseech all employers to review and, where necessary, to retrofit their establishments in an effort to meet the requirement of the law. The OSH Act, Mr. Speaker, will be a landmark piece of legislation in the history of Jamaica. It will guarantee safe and healthy places of work. It will enhance productivity. It will put us on par with international standards. It will give us a competitive edge, and certainly it will draw investors to our shores. I invite every Jamaican to be a part of this and to make it a success. We are going for it. And with all hands on deck, we will achieve our goal of bolting the foundation for lasting prosperity through dignity and respect. Mr. Speaker, social protection is central to our mission in the ministry, and we are pursuing several initiatives to provide adequate coverage to our citizens. The National Policy for Senior Citizens has been revised and was tabled in Parliament as a Green Paper in February of this year. The revised policy outlines the government commitment to provide protection for senior citizens and to encourage their continued contribution to national development, whilst at the same time protecting their rights. Mr. Speaker, the Green Paper is on the Ministry's and GIS website, and we invite persons to give their comments and feedback. Mr. Speaker, the National Insurance Scheme provides benefits to over 124,000 persons. This represents a 12.6% increase over the previous financial year. As a minister, I am committed to the transformation of the NIS and to improving the level of service offered. Last year, I handed out the new NIS cards to all MPs. We revamped all our application forms to make them more user-friendly, and all new pensioners now receive their payments via direct deposit into their bank accounts. The management information system of the NIS is being overhauled to introduce cutting-edge technologies. This will result in increased automation, greater accessibility, and efficiency in customer service delivery. In the first instance, before the end of this financial year, funeral grants will be automated to allow online accessibility. Members of the public will be able to apply for this benefit online and receive payments directly into their accounts within 2 weeks. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry has embarked on a process of digitization of the paper records of the NIS. This will enable the retrieval of records at a faster pace and a resultant increase in the rate at which we respond to queries, as well as a reduction in the processing time for benefits. I use this opportunity to remind NIS pensioners that our officers are currently in the field conducting a re-verification exercise. This exercise gives us an opportunity to update the information on our new system and to reconnect with our pensioners. Mr. Speaker, pensioners will recall that I indicated earlier in this Honourable House that provision has been made in the budget for an increase in the rate of pension. We have completed the actuarial review of the National Insurance Scheme, which was commissioned during the financial year 2017-2018. The report highlights the financial performance of the scheme over the period 2013-2016. The report specifically points to the fact that the viability of the scheme has improved somewhat. I am therefore pleased to announce that based on the performance of the fund and the recommendation of the actuaries, the old age benefits payable under the National Insurance Scheme will be increased by 20%, moving from $2,800 per week to $3,400 per week. Mr. Speaker, this increase is retroactive to April 1st, 2018. Mr. Speaker, effective August 1st, 2018, funeral grants payable under the National Insurance Scheme will be increased to $90,000. It is my duty to reassure the country that the government is committed to the advancement of persons with disabilities. We are passionate and committed to the inclusion, integration, and empowerment of persons with disabilities in society. If I may quote from a presentation done on behalf of the Most Honourable Andrew Holness at a recent conference at the University Centre for Disability Studies, it was reaffirmed that as a government, our aim is, and I quote, a Jamaica where all persons with disabilities can identify with the inclusiveness in our motto, out of many, one people. End of quote. This, Mr. Speaker, brings me to the Disabilities Act 2014. I must admit that its implementation is taking longer than anticipated. However, Mr. Speaker, we have not been sitting idly by because work is in progress. The lag can be accounted for, and as I speak, I can report on the progress thus far. The Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities is being restructured. Consultancy for the Organizational Management Review and Development started in December 2017. The first draft of the structure is to be submitted for ratification. Deliverables from Codes of Practice consultancy reviewed and feedback provided. The gap analyses for both education and training as well as employment have been completed, and we intend to go on to the next step in the process in short order. We are working to establish a Disabilities Rights Tribunal. The consultations continue, and it is hoped that in the near future, the skill sets from the various interest groups will be identified for this tribunal. Mr. Speaker, earlier in my presentation, I spoke to the training and employment of persons with disabilities. During the 2017-2018 financial year, the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities continued to reach out in a tangible way to persons with disabilities. For the 2017-2018 financial year, financial assistance in the amount of $12.5 million was provided to 696 persons with disabilities. 339 females and 357 males received assistance for assistive aids, education and training, medical expenses, transportation, income-generating projects, employment support staff, and compassionate grants. Additionally, 65 clients received assistance amounting to $7.1 million for economic empowerment grants. Approximately $24 million has been allocated in the 2018-2019 financial year to provide support for persons with disabilities. We continue to ensure that persons with disabilities are protected and can enter the job market with dignity and respect, either as entrepreneurs or employees. The Ministry encourages all persons with disabilities to register with the JCPD. Registration can be done at any of our parish offices island-wide. When registered, the Ministry will be better able to serve the needs of the community. Mr. Speaker, the 2018-2019 financial year, $8.4 billion has been budgeted to be spent on the PATH program. The program continues to target 360,000 Jamaicans who are poor and in need of assistance. In June 2017, there was a 30% increase in the level of benefits paid to all categories of beneficiaries, which include children, pregnant and lactating mothers, the elderly, and persons with disabilities. We recognize, Mr. Speaker, that after 15 years of implementation of the PATH program, there is a need to reassess families to determine their progress and the need for continued participation in the program. That reassessment began in September of 2017 for some 11,000 PATH families who have been beneficiaries since 2002 and 2003. Mr. Speaker, PATH is built on the premise that education and health are key components to breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty. The success of the program in achieving this objective is evidenced by the number of beneficiaries who excel in their educational pursuits and are now part of the labor market. Mr. Speaker, we have persons in society today who are doctors, lawyers, engineers, teachers, social workers, you name it, who once benefited from the PATH program. In commemoration of the 15th anniversary of the program, the Ministry awarded 17 scholarships to students pursuing tertiary level education. Mr. Speaker, it was difficult to select the scholarship recipients as we had well over 40 highly qualified applicants. We are working to empower new families entering the program to become independent of state assistance. We will achieve this through the Steps to Work program and more active case management.
Mr. Moody, the member's time for speaking has expired.
Mr. Speaker, I ask the member's time be extended for 15 minutes to enable her to complete her presentation.
Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. Ms. Robb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, climate change and other weather phenomena have resulted in increased disasters globally. The financial year 2017-2018 saw devastation wreaked on several of our neighbors by hurricanes Maria, Irma, and Harvey, and numerous other flooding incidents. The Ministry provided relief supplies and sent personnel to the British Virgin Islands and Dominica, who were severely impacted by Hurricane Maria. Additionally, we were instrumental in the evacuation of over 200 Jamaicans who were stranded in the British Virgin Islands. Mr. Speaker, while Jamaica has been spared a major natural disaster during this year, the Ministry responded to 5 major flooding incidents locally. In addition, we responded to a significant number of fires, especially in the parishes of Kingston and St. Andrew. Through partnership with the ODPEM and various organizations, the Ministry of Labour and Social Security provided relief assistance and supplies to over 2,600 affected persons. Approximately $75 million was spent by the ministry on this activity to support persons in their recovery efforts. I would like to publicly thank Food for the Poor for their assistance and partnership with the ministry. Through assistance from the World Bank, we are far advanced in implementing an adaptive social protection curriculum for disaster personnel. This partnership has also resulted in the review and strengthening of the post-disaster damage assessment tool, which we are pleased to announce is now available and accessible in digital format. In our bid to improve our ability to respond, recover, and adapt, the ministry in this financial year will continue to strengthen humanitarian response partnerships, improve disaster management systems, increase training of disaster personnel, and maintain the necessary inventory items to effectively counter the impacts of disasters on our citizenry. Mr. Speaker, we continue to strengthen the delivery of services to young children with special needs that are part of the Early Stimulation Program. We have established a new early intervention facility at the Hanover Street location. We have just opened an expanded center on Austin Close in East Kingston. $78 million was spent on constructing additional classrooms and a therapy room. This expanded facility will cater to the educational needs of approximately 160 students with disabilities. The Child Labour Unit continues to fulfill its work with stakeholders locally and internationally to prevent children from engaging in child labour. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica is ahead of the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean, and I'm pleased to report to this Honourable House that we have been rated Tier 1 by the ILO for our efforts in reducing child labour. In conjunction with the U.S. Department of Labor, just this morning, the ministry launched the implementation of the country-level engagement and assistance to reduce child labour project, CLARE 2. Through this project, we will be receiving technical assistance to review existing legislation, finalize the national policy on child labour, and to revise the National Action Plan on child labour. Recently, Mr. Speaker, Statin launched the Jamaica Youth Activity Survey. I would like to put on record sincere thanks to Statin and the ILO for the valuable information emanating from this research. This survey has provided the ministry and no doubt the government with data critical to the issue of children engaged in economic activities and children who have never attended school. The Jamaica Youth Activities Survey has revealed that approximately 5.8% of children aged 5 to 17 were involved in child labour and 4% of children aged 5 to 17 were engaged in hazardous work. The survey reported that in 2016, 97.5% of our children aged 5 to 17 are in school. Congratulations are in order for the parents and the various state agencies. We have come a far way. I am disheartened, however, that the study found that less than 1% of children 5 to 17 had never attended school at any point in time for various reasons, such as disability or illness, inability to afford schooling, and children being too young to attend school. Mr. Speaker, some countries would probably be comforted that the figure is this low, but we cannot, as a country, be happy with this. We must build the foundation for lasting prosperity for our children, free from child labour. Our duty as a government is to close that gap on child labour and to ensure that all our children are in school regardless of their circumstances. In the not-too-distant future, I intend to have dialogue with my counterpart ministers to determine how we can pool our resources to treat with the issue of children aged 5 to 17 who have never attended school. At the ministry, we already have PATH and other social intervention measures that we can use in alleviating this situation and look forward to the discussion with my ministerial counterparts. Another initiative aimed at addressing the issue of child labour is the implementation of the risk identification model. The model, which was developed by the ILO and Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, will enable us to identify the areas and sectors with the highest probability of child labour and to create vulnerability maps. Mr. Speaker, this will allow us to interrupt the trajectory of child labour once and for all. Mr. Speaker, June 12, 2018 was celebrated as World Day Against Child Labour. As part of the campaign to eliminate child labour, we are distributing some lapel pins with the child labour logo to all members of this Honourable House. I encourage my colleagues and all of Jamaica to join me in saying no to child labour. Mr. Speaker, we are confident that the work we have been doing over the past 2 years is strategically poised to secure a platform for a better Jamaica. We are working to ensure that the policies, programs, projects, and initiatives we adopt reflect the strategic mission of the government to bring about lasting prosperity for the people of Jamaica. The ministry is seized of its role as essential to the development of the country's human capital. We must not only improve the quality of our labour force, but we must make sure that the skills and competencies acquired are in sync with the present and future demands of the globally competitive marketplace. And even as we pursue those objectives, we must work to ensure that the vulnerable among us are provided with minimum protection required to secure their rights. The historical circumstances demand no less of us if we are to represent with pride the legacy of our foreparents. This year, we mark the 80th anniversary of the Labour Uprising and the birth of the modern trade union movement in Jamaica. It is a cause for reflection and a cause for celebration, because many of us stand today in position of privilege, unaware, and some may be even unconcerned about the human suffering, humiliation, and indignity that generations before us had to endure. The events of 1938 is a wind beneath our wings, so that our efforts at the ministry is to put all of that in context to ensure that our legacy will be understood as one in which we are bolting the foundation for lasting prosperity through dignity and respect for all Jamaica. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I now ask that you invite the member from Eastern St. Thomas, opposition spokesman on agriculture and fisheries, to make his long-awaited presentation.
Dr. Ferguson.
Victor. Oh, Victor. Victor. Come on, Victor. Yeah, draw. Go out a little bit more. Yes.
Mr. Speaker, colleague parliamentarians on both sides of this honourable House, it is late, as it is a long overdue presentation. But today I will present a new deal for agriculture and rural development. Indeed, our time of reckoning is now, as the vicissitude of the globalization in an unstable world and the protectionist ill wind from our powerful neighbors, especially to the north, demand that our sector must be modernized without delay. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to thank the Leader of Opposition, Dr. Peter Phillips, for this opportunity to represent the people in this capacity. Special thanks to the members of my task force for their diligent efforts and unwavering commitment in helping to shape the way forward, especially my deputy spokesperson,
Victor Wright, Member of Parliament for Trelawney North. Mr. Speaker, I would like answer to record my own congratulations to the member from St. Andrew South on his first presentation as Shadow Minister of Finance. It was a fiery opening and a harbinger of great things to come. I must also commend Minister Shaw, Minister of Agriculture, for the energy that he has brought to the portfolio. But in truth, energy alone cannot be enough. The optimization of agriculture is much more profound. It requires a new deal. Although today's presentation will be my first in this capacity, I'm no stranger to the Ministry of Agriculture, having served as Minister of State between 1998 and 2002. Mr. Speaker, a committed modern approach to agriculture, underpinned by smart technology and adequate funding, will not only improve the lives of those directly in the agriculture sector, but it will improve the socio-economic state of the nation and will be a primary vehicle to steer our youths from crime and put us on a path to harmonious living in a Jamaica that works for all. Mr. Speaker, I will detail the course to be charted in a moment, but permit me a few moments to specially greet those in the gallery and all those viewing or listening via cyberspace. Mr. Speaker, despite the resilience of our farmers, our food import bill now stands at almost $1.2 billion, more than double that a decade ago. Jamaica requires a new deal for agriculture and rural development. A new deal centered around adequate funding, food and nutrition security, adequate food storage capacity, climate-smart agriculture, research and development, the use of technology, the blue economy, and the human capital in agriculture, and the creation of opportunities for wealth creation for the youth in agriculture. And Mr. Speaker, I say youth. I'm not referring to an inanimate object or cliche to catch attention. I mean a real investment in youth in agriculture. Constituency. Mr. Speaker, let me quickly thank my office staff members. I want to thank my driver, my security, my councillors, caretakers, constituency and divisional executives, the workers and polling division captain and cluster managers in my constituency. I also want to take this opportunity to thank my family, led this afternoon by Bloss, who is in the gallery, and friends of Eastern St. Thomas, Jamaica, and New York chapters for their support and advice over these many years. Last but not by any means least, I want to thank the people of Eastern St. Thomas for 25 consecutive years and memorable years
of our partnership, making me, Mr. Speaker, a 6-star general. A feat very few have achieved in this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, I began the calendar year fulfilling the mandate to supply.
Don't disturb the member. Don't disturb the member, please.
Mr. Speaker, I began the calendar year fulfilling the mandate to supply the social, infrastructural, and personal needs of my constituents. The most important of our social engineering at the constituency level is our education and training initiative to build human capital with an annual investment of $8 million of the $20 million received through programs from the Constituency Development Fund. In fact, Mr. Speaker, this is our flagship program, focusing on Teachers' Day, GSET luncheon and bursaries for top boy and girl, 20 primary schools, 5 preparatory schools. Further support is also given for education assistance, scholarships to teachers and students, and providing equipment to our schools based on need. I want to speak to the Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project. I've written several letters to the Minister with responsibility in relation to this controversial Southern Coastal Highway Improvement Project. Running from Harborview to Port Antonio, my last letter sought to get some kind of status report in relation to the timeline for starting, and most importantly, how the work will impact Eastern St. Thomas in this first stage. Mr. Speaker, my constituents anxiously await the response, and since you now live, Mr. Speaker, in the constituency, I am sure you too would have a vested interest in knowing about this road. Housing for sugar workers. I'd like to thank the previous administration for starting 225 houses for sugar workers in Stokes Hall and Hampton Court. And these free of cost, Mr. Speaker, free of cost, 225 houses. We want to thank the government leader of the House who continued that process, and now Minister Samuda is continuing the process. But we want to know when will the Hampton Court beneficiaries receive their keys for their houses. They have asked me to put that question to you, Minister Shaw, in relation to when the urban centre and the Port Morant Bridge is also of great concern. When are we going to start break ground for the urban centre? When are we going to complete that Port Morant Bridge that has been crawling along, creating nuisance to the surrounding areas? And it is a shame what is taking place relative to the work on that new bridge in Port Morant. The Agro Park started out in good faith, great potential for youth, middle-aged, elderly farmers, inclusive of women, is now a dismal failure. Visited the park 2 weeks ago. It was a shame to see the level of deterioration. Mr. Minister,
I'm inviting you to tour the area. The Minister of Agriculture, I am inviting you to tour the Agro Park in Eastern St. Thomas, along with myself and your technical people, because that Agro Park requires a rescue plan to save that park. We will follow it up. Situational analysis of the agriculture sector. Mr. Speaker, the agriculture sector has always been an important tool of economic growth and development. In fact, both the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have expressed the view that if there's no growth in agriculture, then there'll be no growth in the economy. In 2016, Mr. Speaker, the agriculture sector grew by 13.5%, contributed 7.3% to GDP, and the following year, 2017, there was a precipitous fall. The end result, negative 3.8% growth in 2017. Mr. Speaker, this was due in part to the fact that for all our lives, we have lived on the brink of the unpredictability of weather and have not truly invested in agriculture, which is a critical sector. Mr. Speaker, in 2017, we were impacted by drought in the first quarter, causing a negative 3.7%, and the following 3 quarters, based on rain and flood, it created negative consequences for the sector in that year, as I said before. Mr. Speaker, if truth be told, both administrations have failed to make the required investment to modernize the sector for sustainable growth and to achieve our 2030 development goals. This government, Mr. Speaker, the present government, with a growth and job creation ministry, coupled with an economic growth council, should recognize that a budget of some $6 billion for, not even for agriculture, because that is shared between agriculture and industry and commerce. So the agriculture budget is probably about $4 billion. That kind of budget would still create an anemic sector, a far cry from what is required to meet the growth objective, even when excellent weather conditions prevail during this fiscal year. Already, Mr. Speaker, the weather forecast for this year is not one for optimism. There is a few crops, Mr. Speaker, that are worthy of comments: coffee, cocoa, sugarcane. Mr. Speaker, the coffee farmers are an important part of the agriculture sector, providing significant foreign exchange earnings and providing direct or indirect employment of over 250,000 persons. In 2016-17, the coffee crop produced 23,000 boxes of high mountain coffee and 203,000 boxes of Blue Mountain coffee, with a combined earning of $6 billion Jamaican dollars. However, Mr. Speaker, the price of coffee moved from $13,000 per box in 2015-16 to $4,000 per box in 16-17, and the trend continues. The price, Mr. Speaker, is only one of the problems. The yield achieved was an average of 30 boxes per acre, when in truth and in fact, Mr. Speaker, we need to move to about 90 boxes per acre in order to be on the right path. Mr. Speaker, in this environment of low prices and low productivity, the farmers face challenges. These include coffee leaf loss disease, high cost of inputs, especially fertilizer, poor road conditions, high incidence of natural disaster, and the almost impossible task of getting reasonable agricultural loans due to the high processing fees and high interest rates. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the coffee industry continues to face growing competition from imported coffee beans and finished products. Mr. Speaker, because of the value of this industry to the livelihood of so many, we must pay attention to its visibility and viability. In relation to disease control, Mr. Speaker, a national control program needs to be in place to find new ways to control the deadly coffee leaf disease. In addition, a disease fund should be considered and a crop insurance scheme to offer hope to farmers when parasites and natural disasters strike. We can offer more protection to our local coffee by increasing tariff on imported coffee, and the proceeds should be put in a development fund for the benefit of the industry. Finally, Mr. Speaker, more emphasis needs to be placed on value-added products in the industry. Mr. Speaker, I know that the farmers in St. Thomas, Cedar Valley, and elsewhere, Mount Felix, Hayfield, Johnson Mountain, Rolandsfield, in St. Thomas, being supplied to the fermentary operated by, in the earlier phase, Cocoa Industry Board. Mr. Speaker, the lack of investment and failure to utilize lands in Richmond area of St. Mary is also of concern to farmers in that area. This was once a thriving cocoa farming area, and the farmers are still looking for some improvement and some investment in that regard. The frosty pod rot disease. This too, Mr. Speaker, is of great concern. It in parishes like Clarendon that produces over 65%, St. Mary, parts of St. Catherine, ravaging the crop. Mr. Speaker, I'm reliably informed that despite the government's pronouncement, the coffee farmers, many of whom have suffered losses between 80 and 100% from their yearly crop, they have not received any compensation. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that Cabinet has approved $700 million over the next 2 years for containment and control of the disease. For this year, we have only seen $200 million in the budget. We want to see continued efforts in saving the cocoa industry. The farm gate prices are also of concern. 2016, US 884,000 in terms of export in cocoa. 2016, 894,000 US in terms of export, and in 2015, 554,000. These are issues of moment, Mr. Minister, that we want you to attend to. Mr. Speaker, all is not well with sugar. Sugar is not sweet anymore for the workers and the economic fortunes for the country. However, Mr. Speaker, it is an industry that has far-reaching impact on many constituencies and communities across the country, including my own constituency of St. Thomas Eastern. It is a major player as it relates to labour. Mr. Speaker, of note is the ending of the European Union-funded sugar transformation programme that responded significantly in areas on the issues of health, housing, roads, schools, sports, technology, rural electrification, early childhood education, water, and other areas. Mr. Speaker, the opposition would like to express its appreciation to the EU for that program. Mr. Speaker, the Jamaica Agricultural Commodities Regulatory Authority is also of concern to the opposition. The Act having been promulgated earlier this year, and we are concerned that over this period, there is the view that enough consultation had not taken place with stakeholders, and that it was basically rushed through this Honourable House. The Act which brought together the Coffee Industry Board, the Cocoa Industry Board, the Coconut Industry Board. In its early days, the chairman and the CEO have already resigned. That's a bad sign, Mr. Speaker, and a step in the wrong direction. Already the Chamber of Commerce, the Jamaica Agricultural Society, eminent journalists, private sector leaders, intellectual leaders in agriculture have been raising concerns about these new licensing fees, large import cess, and the penalty for farmers who are not registered under the Act. Mr. Speaker, there are views coming from the sector, from leaders in the sector, that one, there are blatant constitutional conflicts contained within the provisions of the Act. There are provisions within the Act that are conflicting with our laws dealing with good order and practices in the local business environment. 3, there are provisions in the Act that are conflicting with Jamaican laws which ratified the Uruguay round of World Trade Organization. The Act seems to have ignored the realities of the standardization infrastructure, which allows for third-party certification and the use of food safety standard infrastructure, which allows for third-party use in relation to food safety standards and market-driven quality issues. The law seeks to prescribe standards for code of good practice, which are conflicting with international norms and market demands. Jamaica Agricultural Society, Mr. Speaker, I want to say a few words. Established in 1895, celebrated 123 years, the 29th of May 2018. And during this period, this association, society, have impacted on the agriculture sector. What we have seen, Mr. Speaker, that over the last 15 years, the society's assets have moved from $175 million to $500 million, Mr. Speaker. They have reduced their debts from $200 million to $69 million. They have embarked and launched the Eat Jamaica, or Eat What You Grow campaign since 2003. And that is of moment in relation to the savings created in terms of import substitution. Mr. Speaker, the JS has also continued to promote the sector and the farmers at the Denby Agriculture Show and the other 6 parish shows, egg, and elsewhere. What we are saying as an opposition, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition wants to make it very clear that there can be no attempt to repeal the Jamaica Agricultural Societies Act without the broad participation of all critical stakeholders, including the opposition. Mr. Speaker, a new deal for agriculture. The opposition's New Deal for agriculture required us and require boldness. A New Deal must offer opportunities not previously available to people to change their relationship to the means of production and change their livelihood and their quality of life, and to give them the opportunity to create wealth. A New Deal must be attractive enough to move from 16% of the population that is presently into farming to a new height. A New Deal must make titled lands available, putting the rural community at the center of the drive for agricultural growth. Mr. Speaker, New Deal must create an organic link between the public and the private sector in agriculture. It must be data-driven, that takes farmers from the seed to produce with maximum yield and sustainable markets with adequate storage. A New Deal must involve technology, not a singular drone, but real partnership between the farmers and the researchers, a partnership where the farmers can in real time have access to the crops that are in demand, the targets and how best to maximize their yield en route to their targets. Mr. Speaker, we in the opposition believe the 2030 goals are achievable, but only within the context of a New Deal. Mr. Speaker, our New Deal will construct and will be constructed on 12 critical pillars. One, Mr. Speaker, mindful of the fiscal space, mindful of the environment, economic environment in which we are operating. This New Deal will start with...
The Speaker's time has expired.
Oh, thank you. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the member's time be extended by the grand sum of 15 minutes, for which I am sure he'll be able to conclude his good presentation.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Ferguson.
Constraints, we are not putting a number now, but the whole idea, Mr. Speaker, is to move the sector forward with confidence that there are funds to deal with agriculture. We recognize that a $6 billion budget would not be able to carry that sector to achieve the goals and objective of a New Deal. The bond proposes a 20-year
multi-billion-dollar bond issue based on the prevailing conditions that will determine the kind of moratorium on principal payments, a sinking fund to retire the principal, a prompt interest payment fund to pay annual interest. And we are saying, Mr. Speaker, that the bond to be designated as a bearer bond facilitating negotiations and sale as the OLA requires. The bond will offer both fixed and variable rate purchase options. The bond will be issued by blue chip institution. The blue chip fund manager will be appointed to ensure principal and interest are paid out. But this we are talking about, Mr. Speaker, the opportunity to inject and improve our farm roads, modern equipment, cutting-edge technology, and other critical sector. Access to credit for medium and small farmers. We believe that in the present situation, our medium and small farmers, New Deal would offer a revolving line of credit for at least $1 billion at about 4 or 5%, again taking into account the prevailing conditions of the time and looking at whether it's a DBJ or Exim Bank. But again, Mr. Speaker, this is to give the medium and small farmers an opportunity to farm with confidence. National food security policy. Well, policy, yes, because that has been on the table since 2013. But I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, food security is essential for the life of our nation. Food security exists when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. Mr. Speaker, it is projected that to feed the world by 2015, there needs to be an increase in food production by 60%. Mr. Speaker, considering that Jamaica imports 60% of our food requirement, it is abundantly clear that we are not on a path for food security. Mr. Speaker, with the levels of input in Jamaica, we are eating directly from the containers and a lesser extent from the farms, which can be affected by a delayed shipment or reduced by poor weather outcomes. Mr. Speaker, the FAO has found that in the Caribbean, we lose 50% of what is produced on the farm due to post-harvest loss. These factors exacerbate food insecurity. Mr. Speaker, the national food security must be based on availability, access, utilization, and stability. Availability. The single most important factor in determining the price of crops is the cost of seeds. The creation of a seed bank that would provide clean planting material generated from research and technology is going to be important in this area. Mr. Speaker, our farmers now pay almost $30,000 for a pound of onion seed. It requires about 4 pounds to maximize the yield from 1 acre. This is important, Mr. Speaker, and we note that the cost of these seeds here in Jamaica is almost 50% more than the cost on the open market. Future PNP government, Mr. Speaker, will intervene and release a squeeze put on farmers for purchasing these seeds from unscrupulous local people. These are actions we must take going forward. In relation to access, Mr. Speaker, the provision of appropriate transport from farm to storage and to market is a must. Not transport in the traditional way of whole trucks covered with crocus, but transport in appropriate vehicles maintaining correct temperature and protecting our produce from farm to destination. Mr. Speaker, to sustain this level of productivity in the sector, the New Deal would look to forge markets locally and for export by identifying high-demand markets for which we can match production volumes and quantities to be demanded. Utilization, Mr. Speaker, under food security. The stability provided by the availability, access, and utilization of the produce will provide financial stability and ultimately wealth for the farmers, making agriculture more attractive for youth. Mr. Speaker, the absence of infrastructure such as road, water, electricity, and security are glaring deficits, and the fragmentation of the plots of land in our agri-park must be addressed. Mr. Speaker, in order for us to truly benefit from the agri-parks, the thinking must be multifaceted. Traditional and non-traditional crops must be interwoven to increase output and bring benefits to the soil. While we are on the agri-parks, I have to pose the question, how can we hope to increase export if we cannot get global gap certification? The IDB provided US $15 million to conduct agriculture competitiveness program. Phase 1 is completed, yet there is no global gap certification, no market plan strategy, Mr. Minister. The concept as outlined by the Minister for Mother Farm is one we endorse, but we want equity for small farmers that feed into the mother farms, access to technology, water, best practices to provide quality and maximum yield. We believe this is a must. Pre-larceny. No food safety plan can exist without addressing pre-larceny. There is an estimated $6 billion loss per year. Colleagues, $6 billion due to pre-larceny. It is a great deterrent to active farming. And we believe where we are now, there is need for a revision of the Agriculture Produce and the Pre-Larceny Act with a view to increase the fines. And while there is contemplation of moving the fines from $250 to $3 million, we believe that those fines are still too low. Mr. Speaker, pre-larceny is now a major organized crime and should be treated as such. Under the New Deal, we'll address the legislation for pre-larceny, linking it to organized crime and the Proceeds from Crime Act in a laser-like approach to rid the farmers of the cancer. Mr. Speaker, we emphasize that the farmers that are the ones who suffered the most from these losses, that under New Deal, we'll create a support fund for the victims of pre-larceny from the increased fines from pre-larceny. This is important, Mr. Speaker, because oftentimes we concentrate on the punishment, but the persons who suffer from pre-larceny, including our small farmers, they get nothing. And so, under the New Deal, climate change and sustainable agriculture, this is important, Mr. Speaker, and I believe that coming out of what we have seen last year, protective agriculture is a must going forward and we have seen examples from the United States, $200 million US loss from cherry in 2012, $1 billion from livestock. All of this, Mr. Speaker. Number 5, under the investment in research, development, and technology. This again, to improve Boggles, to improve our research stations across the country. All of this, we believe, Mr. Speaker, that in spite of the $300 million for this year in the budget, Boggles, Mount Pelier, Orange River, Minard must benefit, and they must benefit from the new technology and benefit from research and development. Investment in human capital. Number 6. Not only have we failed to retool our industry, but we have failed to make our biggest asset in human capital ready. Average age of farmers, 55. 82% of them only primary education. We believe, Mr. Speaker, that we have to move now to inject greater capital in CASE and UA, UTEC, NCU, all of these institutions to make critical and the vocational training centers as part of it. Our agricultural graduates, Agricultural Alumni Association must play a major role in this building of new human capital. And therefore, the New Deal puts on the table great possibilities with 4-H, JS playing their role also. Investment in infrastructure, number 7. This again, we believe, Mr. Speaker, that a New Deal, no less than 1.5 billion Jamaican dollars should be 1.5 billion, no less than that each year for agriculture roads and for maintenance, if we expect the outcome. Farm buildings, sanitation cannot be ignored. International organization standardization, FAO, all of this to get accreditation for our farms. Agriculture lands and titling. This again, 800,000 parcels of land to be titled, and the government is speaking to 15,000 per annum. Well, if you're talking 4, what it will require now is to get off. It will take us, at 15,000, it will take us 50 years. We are now saying a minimum of 50,000 titles a year, Minister Vaz, to deal with that situation. Mr. Speaker, in relation to lands, we have to look seriously. Building housing schemes on farmlands, that must stop. In the last 2 decades, Mr. Speaker, 9,722 hectares of agricultural lands have been converted to housing solutions. This is something that we must deal with, and I am very pleased that the opposition leader has established a national commission on land that will deal with land in a serious way, deal with land distribution, deal with equity going forward. Just
Mr. Speaker, it is... Mr. Speaker, we ask that the member get 5 minutes to conclude, finally, his presentation.
Those in favor? Those against? Ayes have it. Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We'll keep it here. We'll keep it here.
Mr. Speaker, youth in agriculture. Mr. Speaker, youth in agriculture. And they, although they are number 9, it's not by order of importance. We believe that given our average age of farmer, that we must now, to stem the urban drift, bring to the fore adequate funding to deal with youth in agriculture, We believe, Mr. Speaker, that the sector has been seen as a dirty profession by many. It is seen in relation to less intellectual prowess, the farmers. Where we are now, Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure that adequate funding, adequate opportunities in relation to education and otherwise, courses in genetic modification, soil technology, research, development of resistant strains for gratification, yield and production, all of this, agrotourism, agroforestry, secondary agriculture, from soil to produce, all of this to attract our youth. JS rather will have to change their by paradigm shift to give us the opportunity to get and to interest youth in agriculture. The 4-H with value added rather will continue to work in terms of providing electronic educational material online to help in this regard. Mr. Speaker, we believe that the New Deal will attract youths to agriculture and communicate to them a way that they can relate. Nutraceutical industry, again, Mr. Speaker, 8% rise. We are seeing it, US $423 billion, as all the potential Jamaica 160 plants worldwide, with 84 of these endemic to Jamaica. We're also saying, Mr. Speaker, that in relation to the nutraceutical, Jamaica has a very critical role to play relative to the beauty and cosmetic industry. Cannabis, medicinal cannabis, again, important. Israel, Sweden, and a lesser extent, United States already advanced. We believe that the small farmers must have a stake and not dominated by foreigners. We believe that the banks must now play a critical role, and we appreciate the fact that you, Minister, has been visiting areas and looking for possibilities as it relates to the cannabis aspect. But we believe that a joined-up government is going to be important in bringing that thing, and we are also critical of the banks that appropriate legislation must come that will allow the banks to sit with the cannabis farmers and give them a chance for survival. Mr. Speaker, 12, organic, number 12, but that one will come, has great potential, US $1 billion. Fisheries, Mr. Speaker, and I will speak more when we get a chance in the bill. 400 million US, our fisher folks. I'm very happy for the fisheries bill of 2018, but we believe that that is important in getting certain things. We are asking, Mr. Speaker, concession on fuels for fisher folk, group life insurance should be afforded, government contribution to disaster preparedness, etc. Rural development, Mr. Speaker, the rural-urban drift, this too is important in the New Deal. The opposition is calling for the development of a rural development corporation similar to the UDC in relation to rural development. We believe that Norman Manley gave us independence. It is our time now to move towards economic independence. Conclusion. Mr. Speaker, we believe that we must ensure that there is adequate and available funding for agriculture. We must embrace research, technology, and development in agriculture. We must invest in new fields such as organic and nutraceutical. We must have equitable and fair land distribution. We must ensure food security. We must invest in youth in agriculture. We must invest in our fisher folks and dairy farmers. Mr. Speaker, there is nothing more to be said. We must begin the work. Our declining band of loyal farmers, rural youths, and other dependent residents of our rural communities are crying out 50 years of negative to marginal growth must now be reversed. A nation awaits. In a modernized agriculture economy, that is what the answer lies in a modern agriculture. Let a generation from now, we look back and say it was the members of this honorable House that had the foresight and the maturity to pave the way to a new deal for agriculture and turn the country around. With God's guidance, if we do this, we cannot fail. I thank you.
I totally share the views of my friend from Eastern St. Thomas. As a former Minister of Agriculture, very insightful and, of course, well-researched, and a civil presentation. Congratulations, my friend. Mr. Speaker, we now call on the Member of Parliament for Southwest St. Anne. Did I say so? Okay. From Northwest St. Anne, opposition spokesman on health, to make his presentation.
Dr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I rise to make this my first presentation in the capacity as opposition spokesperson on health, I want to at the outset acknowledge my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Whose words have been a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Let me say a special thanks to the leader of the opposition and soon to be Prime Minister of Jamaica for the confidence he has reposed in me to shadow this critical portfolio, and I can assure him that I will not sleep on the job. Mr. Speaker, to the faithful and loyal people of Northwest St. Anne, who decided on 2 previous occasions that they were not going to gamble, but they would stick with Campbell. Mr. Speaker, they have done it before, and they'll do it again. Last but not least, Mr. Speaker, I must pause to acknowledge members of my family who have been a tower of strength and have made a tremendous sacrifice for me to serve. It is indeed a privilege to serve, and it is my sincere desire to make Jamaica a better place for my 3 children, namely Naila Campbell, Madison Campbell, and the Prince of the Lot, Joshua Dayton Ricardo Campbell, to grow and be afforded equal opportunities to be the very best version of themselves. Mr. Speaker, it is impossible to have a prosperous country without having a healthy population. Healthcare undoubtedly must be a right to all citizens. The delivery of healthcare, however, must be done in an equitable manner. The minister in his presentation stated that it is unrealistic to expect the government to be everything to everyone at the same time. He further stated that this view is perpetuated by politicians. Shall I remind the minister that it is his party in a previous campaign that made the proposal for free health care. Mr. Speaker, I'm of the view that no one should be denied health care based on their ability to pay. However, I need some assistance in understanding why the government would need to provide free health care to those who can afford to pay. Mr. Speaker, I dare say that this policy has further widened the inequality in access to quality health care and can at best be considered a Pyrrhic victory for its proponents. How has this policy affected the sector? It has caused overcrowding in the facilities, resulting in shortage of supplies, long waiting periods, poor healthcare service delivery as employees are overworked and underpaid, leaving little room for motivation. And it has also resulted in decreased production and productivity of patients and staff. There is a clear need for a policy that brings public and private providers of healthcare to the table for a feasible financial model to be agreed upon. This will likely involve some public-private partnership and a comprehensive health insurance policy. Public education, health promotion, and a return to the old adage of prevention being better than cure. Mr. Speaker, a survey that was done by the MAJ a few years ago showed that there was 100% dissatisfaction with the public health system. You see, sir, the people who actually use the public health system are not fooled by the public relations that is taking place. Even a local government representative from the Jamaica Labour Party is not fooled by the minister's PR team, as she decried the shortage of beds at a hospital the minister was referring to as first class. The councillor being none other than Kim Brown Lawrence from the Brownstone Division, and the facility being St. Anne's Bay Hospital. When it comes to the health of our people, there is no space for politicking. She's right. The minister needs to think less about politicking and public relations, but rather relate to the reality. As she said in this A-class facility that the minister and the mayor were describing, people were begging her to get beds for them because they were literally sick and tired. It is a disgrace that improvement is not near if the minister continues with just PR, because he is not accepting of the reality of the situation. I don't want persons to think that I am here just to criticize the minister or the ministry. There are a lot of positives with our health sector.
If it is deserved, go right ahead.
We have very strong human resource. We have a good regulatory system with certified personnel. We have committed and dedicated staff. We have increased our life expectancy. We have decreased fetal and mortality and maternal mortality. We have greater than 90% vaccination coverage, and we have a lot of highly trained professionals. My concern, however, is that healthcare is now cloaked in public relations. Jamaica Moves seems to be the big idea project, and whilst Jamaica Moves is good, it does not encompass health in all aspects. Access and equality are missing. Mr. Speaker, I would also want to give credit for the Adopt a Clinic initiative, which I think is a fabulous program. The overall budget, however, for this sector is low. The budget is really about 3% of real gross domestic product. The recommended allocation is about 10% of GDP. Thus, it is easy to see that the sector is grossly underfunded. Jamaica averages about 5.2%, whilst the global average is about 9.2% and 11.3% in the Americas. Mr. Speaker, I'll speak a little bit about Cornwall Regional. A lot has been said about the debacle at Cornwall Regional Hospital. Let me make my position on the matter abundantly clear. The air quality issues at the facility predates this Minister of Health. The PAHO report spoke to being made aware of these issues in 2009 when the member from Southeast Clarendon was the Minister of Health.
I've never sought to accuse the minister of being the cause of the problem, nor this administration for being the genesis of the issue. However, under this minister felt, according to his own words, the issue became a crisis. Where I blame the minister is for being derelict in how he acted when it became a crisis. We contend that the minister erred when he overruled the CMO and technocrats to evacuate the building, and he erred when he kept patients and staff in an unhealthy building. He has stated that there is now a team in place that is independent. I welcome that announcement. But whilst the minister boasts about it, I want to remind him that it is a little late. It comes after much suffering and pain. He also stated that some of us in this house likes contention to get attention and all of those. Mr. Speaker, had it not been for what he calls contention, which is actually proper representation, then none of us here would have been aware of the suffering of the nurses and others that they had to endure at Cornwall region. Call it what you want to call it. It is representation of the people. By any other name, it is still representation. I would have been equally derelict, Mr. Speaker, as the minister if I had not said anything about the matter. If the minister's conscience served him well as his public relations team, he would not be sitting here as minister today. If he placed as much emphasis and accountability as he does on public relations, he would not be sitting here as minister today. It is obvious also that we do not have a prime minister who will use authority where the minister's conscience refuses to serve them well. And this leaves us in a very unhealthy state. Let me read a WhatsApp message from one of the staff members. And I quote, Dr. Campbell, you don't know me, but I'm a nurse at CRH. I want to tell you thanks from the bottom of my heart for speaking up on our behalf. Your braveness in the face of harsh criticism caused us to speak out more for ourselves. And we all agree that had it not been for your intervention, we might still be on the sick building inhaling God knows what. My future self and children are grateful. Thank you, sir. End of quote. You see, Mr. Speaker, you must always make sure your feet are planted in the right position and then stand for what is right. It is not my intention to do another interrogation on CRH at this time. We are willing to play a role in getting the institution back up and running to its full capacity because it is too vital of an institution to be operating with such amputated functions. Mr. Speaker, in relation to primary health care, there has not been enough emphasis placed on primary health care, and this has affected the belief in the primary health care system. We don't think enough is being done with the renewed community health aid program. We don't think enough is being done to renovate and build primary health care facilities. I give a specific example in my own constituency of Runaway Bay Health Center. This is a health center for which we had identified land, handed over the land to the Ministry of Health. The design was done, ground was breaking, NHF and everyone came along that they would fund the project. And 2 years later, Mr. Speaker, the sign is now washed out and the community is told that it is no longer a priority. Any member who passes on the corridor in Runaway Bay on a day when they have antenatal clinic will see pregnant females standing under an almond tree. Mr. Speaker, whether it is raining or sun is shining, that's where they have to be standing. And they are being told by this government that building that health center in Runaway Bay is not a priority. We will not tolerate that, Mr. Speaker, and we are making strong representation for the health center to be built in Runaway Bay so that the people no longer have to suffer such inhumane conditions. Supplies continues to be a challenge. I'm not here, Minister Vaz, to either take credit or blame for anything before. Charting the course forward. Supplies continue to be a challenge. Staffing for primary health care is also woefully lacking. All these factors lead to an overcrowding in our hospitals as persons continue to access hospitals as the first point of contact for all maladies. There have been increased reports of vector-borne illnesses, and we are saddened to hear of a case of death due to dengue. We are also aware that several other cases have been reported, and there clearly needs to be a ramping up of preventative measures to prevent this becoming an outbreak. In relation to the tobacco legislation, Mr. Speaker, we must give credit to the former minister, the member from Eastern St. Thomas, who, despite all the critics, was brave in piloting the tobacco legislation through this House. We believe it is time now for the accompanying regulations so that we can fully combat the non-communicable diseases. The health insurance scheme is something that we also can find a consensus on. We agree that there is need for such a scheme. We do not know if there is need to spend $722,000 US with a firm for them to do a development, but we agree in principle that there needs to be a comprehensive health insurance scheme, and we would like to be a part of the discussion as we go forward in developing this policy. In relation, Mr. Speaker, to pharmaceuticals and the Pharmaceutical Society, there's a worrying suggestion to give prescriptive right to persons not trained as doctors. This might be catastrophic as there are requirements before prescriptive rights are given to nurses and pharmacy techs, such as education and disease conditions, drugs, their potency, efficacy, half-life, drug-drug interaction, and the side effect profile. You know, persons often think that it is just a case that doctors don't want others to get prescriptive rights. But it's really not about that. The fact of the matter is that the training for doctors is a comprehensive program in which they have to understand the pathophysiology of the disease conditions, and they have to understand the pharmacology of the medications that they are prescribing. You cannot be prescribing medications if you don't know about drug-drug interaction. You can't be prescribing medications if you don't know about the side effect profile and all of those things. So there is need for us to proceed with caution. I believe that if there is a shortage of persons out in the fields and we want to be able to get more persons accessing prescription drugs, what we ought to do, seeing that the medical classes have increased in size, what we ought to do is to ensure that after internship in the senior house officer year, that we make it mandatory that these young doctors have to go out into our health centers. This will do several things. It will ensure that we have a doctor in the clinics in rural Jamaica, and it will ensure that we have persons there who can treat these persons. It cannot be that we say we are putting a focus on primary health care, but in the majority of health centers in the country, there is no doctor working inside it. And we want to fix it. If you don't want to do it, give me the work and let us fix it. Mr. Speaker, free healthcare in its current form, as I said before, is a Pyrrhic victory. Although a political decision, it is not sustainable. There is a need to collect the health insurance from all the persons. Even if we were to keep free healthcare in its current form, a simple thing that we could do, Mr. Speaker, is simply to collect from those persons who are insured. What benefit is it to the country for us to be turning away those persons who are currently insured? I am a responsible adult. I take out health insurance. I go to a public hospital, and I'm not being asked to present my health insurance card so that can be charged. You could be charged for the visit. You could be charged for the diagnostics. You could be charged for the pharmaceuticals, Mr. Speaker, and that is simple money that would come over to the government, even if you decide to keep the policy as is. We have done a lot of work, Mr. Speaker, in relation to HIV. The incidence has been reduced drastically, which will affect our international funding. And I appeal to the government to ensure that we place sufficient allocation towards the HIV program so that we can keep the mother-to-child rate at 0. That's where we want to keep it. We want to ensure that we can keep that at 0. So it is actually something good that the country has done in reducing this. But when you do so well, you may end up losing some international funding. And so we ask that the government be very mindful, as we don't want to return to a place where we are having these. Mr. Speaker, in relation to some of the morgue services, when will this Parliament get a copy of the full report into the incident surrounding the improper disposal of the bodies of neonates at KPH? We maintain that natural justice dictates that a man ought not to be a judge in his own cause. And as such, the directors of SERHA, who have direct responsibility for Victoria Jubilee Hospital and KPH, ought to recuse themselves from the matter whilst the investigation takes place. Even so, Mr. Speaker, we patiently await the reports to see if it is in keeping with our own investigations as to what took place at KPH. And I am yet to hear, I may have missed it, Mr. Speaker, but I'm yet to hear even an apology from the minister to the families the dead bodies were missing and were seen in the mouths of dogs. I'm yet to hear even an apology from the minister. Mr. Speaker, in relation to staff, we continue to lose skilled nurses due to poor remuneration. About a year ago, when this issue came up, the minister said that they were going to prevent some of them from leaving. We suggested at that time that that does not make sense, but that you should train the persons and have them do some of the practical work elsewhere. I'm happy to see that the minister has now seen the light and has now taken on that approach to ensure that these persons can do the theory here and do the practical elsewhere, so we can continue to replenish our staff as we lose some of our most skilled workers. In relation to infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, there are poor working conditions, limited security features. There are very limited plans of upgrade to our infrastructure. The old plants need upgrading. We have a very poor history of maintenance, and we have too many non-functioning and poorly maintained equipment in our hospitals. Mr. Speaker, when someone in rural Jamaica gets ill and they have features of a stroke, having a stroke, the cause can be from a clot in a vessel, or it can be from a bleed. In order for you to institute treatment, you need to first do a CT scan to find out, is it that this person has a clot, or is it that they are bleeding in their brain? What happens in rural Jamaica for the vast majority of persons is that they have to lay down in that bed. If they recover, they recover. If they don't, then they just don't recover. This is unacceptable for us to continue operating like this as a country. Mr. Speaker, at Cornwall Regional Hospital, their CT scan machine, I'm told, is working. While the reason why they're outsourcing CT scans is because they don't have any space to put the machine. But the machine itself is working. When somebody goes to Cornwall, they have to take them to Falmouth or Noel Homes to do an X-ray. They have to send all of their CTs to hospital, and that's why the member who is uninformed from West Portland did not understand the complexity of the matter. They are actually sending every person who needs a CT scan that goes to Cornwall Regional, and paying $28,000 per person, and they're doing upwards of 20 per day. And their machine at Cornwall Regional is working, but it needs a room for them to put it in for it to work. Mr. Speaker, this is unacceptable. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
I am of the view, sir, that quite a bit of the persons who died in rural Jamaica may not have died if they were in Kingston. Wow. And I'm also of the view that quite a bit of the persons who died in Kingston would not have died if they were in Miami. Most of us here, we represent rural constituencies. We are very familiar with what is going on here. We get those requests almost daily from persons coming to us asking us what the different levels of assistance for whatever investigations they need. This is not a political point that is being made. This is a reality. When a worker of mine says to me that she's lying down with her consort, he starts complaining of a headache. They rush him to the hospital. When he gets to the hospital, they say you need a CT scan. She goes home and collects all the money she can find. Goes to Island Radiology in Ocherius, gets the CT scan done privately. They realize that he has a bleed in the brain and they look at her and tell her he is going to die. Wow. She calls and she says, she's crying. She's asking what is going on. Yes. They said he's going to die, Mr. Speaker, because there isn't an intensive care unit bed and they cannot do neurosurgery operation if they don't have an intensive care unit bed to put him in after. And so they literally looked her in the face and told her that he is going to die. There's nothing that can be done. This is the reality. And it is the reality of a lot of us in here. And if we remove the lens, the green or whatever lens, if we remove it and look at the issue objectively, all of us would agree that this is the reality for majority of the persons in rural Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of work to be done. And if the government wants to complain and play a blame game, then they can get out of the way and give us the work to do, because we will do the work. There must be a plan to increase the budgetary allocation to the Ministry of Health. There has to be, and I'm quite sure the Minister agrees with that, because the sector is currently underfunded. We as a country must sit down and develop a 10-year plan with a view to increasing substantially the allocation to the Ministry of Health. In relation to primary health care, we must improve the infrastructure, and this is what a future PNP administration will do. We'll improve the infrastructure in primary health care system. We'll improve the supplies of primary care centers. We will define the roles of the centers of excellence, which the former minister, again from Eastern St. Thomas, did a lot of work on, and this has also been languishing. We must incentivize work in primary health care to make it more attractive to staff to go there. A doctor is not going to run away from KPH or St. Anne's Bay to go and work in a health center over in Moko, Mr. Speaker, because in the hospital, his or her basic salary, the impecunious return won't allow them to take care of their families, so they have to do sessions. The penniless. When they go and they do sessions in a hospital, the sessions is almost 2 times. That's what really makes up the salary. So for you to take one of them and try to lure them into a healthcare facility, they're not going to go there because it does not make financial sense for them. And so we must increase the salary in our primary healthcare facilities to make it more attractive. I want my private boat to capsize too. We must improve the housing in rural areas so that it can attract staff. Yes. We must expand the hours of work for all types of Type 5 health centers to reduce the pressure on hospitals, thus reducing overcrowding and the long waiting time. not just a selected few, all of our type 5s, so that persons who have these conditions, who are in ESI 4 or 5, who don't need to be in a hospital, can go to a health center and receive quality care. Mr. Speaker, we must look towards having a doctor in each of our rural health centers. The member from Western Portland, I'm sure, would be very appreciative for Buff Bay Hospital to have constant supply of these persons. Mr. Speaker, we must also look towards mobile health care delivery. Mr. Speaker, majority of males in this country refuse to seek medical attention. Majority of males in this country refuse to seek medical attention until it is too late. Most of them, Mr. Speaker, would say prostate problems. Because of the nature of the test, most of them don't get tested. Most of them, Mr. Speaker, at the time that they find out that they have prostate problems is when they now have urinary retention, or what country people call stoppage of water. We must therefore increase mobile healthcare delivery so we can take the healthcare delivery into the communities. Once you increase screening, Mr. Speaker, you will increase the incidence, and thus you will be better able to initiate treatment at an earlier stage. That can only be done by taking the service into the communities to these people. And no one here in their rightful mind would disagree with that. The member from Southeast St. Mary, I'm quite sure, would be very happy if there was a mobile unit driving up into Richmond or driving up into Belfield to do the necessary checks so that we can ensure we have a healthy population.
Don't distract him. Don't respond to this.
Mr. Speaker, we need to create a special unit to deal with primary health care illnesses.
Mr. Minister, the member's time for speaking has expired.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Order, please.
I ask that the member's time be extended sufficient to enable him to complete his work.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Dr. Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. I don't want to be overruled. Mr. Speaker, we must create a special unit to deal with primary health care illnesses. A task force must concentrate on these illnesses and their reports and incidents, have the required equipment to test for these illnesses in a timely manner, and be proactive in order to protect the nation from these illnesses. This must be separate from the daily actions of the primary care unit. They must have their own transport, and they must be able to record findings to the health department for immediate action. Mr. Speaker, in relation to the health insurance scheme, here lies an opportunity for a future PNP administration to offer universal access to quality health care with comprehensive national health insurance funded through Chase, NHF, TF, or NIS. We will implement a comprehensive program which will see full coverage. It will be on a tiered system, and every single Jamaican will be required to have a physical on his or her birthday in order to do annual renewal. This will allow us to be better able to screen for NCDs. You see, Mr. Speaker, this is how Jamaica will move, as this will increase the detection of illness, and thus we will be able to institute early treatment. So the idea, Mr. Speaker, the proposal, is that you want a comprehensive plan. You want for it to be on a tiered basis. So those who are most vulnerable are the persons who will pay the least amount. Those who can pay will pay the most. So it is tiered. Every single person who is on this program will have to go out and have a medical to get it renewed annually. If we are able to screen all of our population, the incidence, the early detection of illnesses will cause us to save so much more by treating with these persons at the primary healthcare facilities as opposed to the secondary healthcare facilities. Mr. Speaker, it is estimated that roughly 20% of our population is hypertensive and diabetic and they don't know. Roughly 20%. Either hypertensive or diabetic and they're not aware. Now, if we think of the sequelae of complications from persons with hypertension or diabetes, those that are going to end up, when we think of the possible complications, right? When we think of the heart attacks, the stroke, the circulatory problems, the kidney problems, and you know, Mr. Speaker, quite a lot, impotence. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wanted, you know, Mr. Speaker, when the member from Western Portland said that he thinks I'd make a good SMO, the title of the presentation is really healthcare from the inside. I really wanted to give us a perspective of it from a practitioner in the field as to what is the reality. You know, when we think of that incidence of hypertension and diabetes, my time spent in ophthalmology, Mr. Speaker, quite a lot of persons who contribute their blindness to just old age. You'd be very surprised to know that some of them have a very reversible cause of their blindness. But because they just sit down and they never ever get it checked, they never really get anything treated. So some of them are diabetic, and you could do a little laser treatment to the back of the eye, and they would have better visual acuity. They'll be able to see better. Some of them have cataracts, and you could easily just take out that lens and put in an artificial lens, and you'd restore some amount of vision to them. So, Mr. Speaker, it is critical that we do this policy in this way so we increase the screening. Mr. Speaker, I am quite sure you must know of the number of cases of persons who have renal disease and need dialysis. This is the most heartbreaking part of the job as an MP. Mr. Speaker, when somebody who has diabetes or high blood pressure and they don't take care of it, they're likely going to get renal disease. When it gets bad, yes, you do. You do. Jamaica Moves is a good initiative. It is a good initiative. It is. It is. Of course it is. No, man. Jamaica Moves is a fabulous initiative. It is. It really is. But that is not the only approach to our non-communicable diseases. That's the point. Of course. So Mr. Speaker, when these persons end up with kidney failure, and they need dialysis, twice per week, Mr. Speaker, and I'll do this too, twice per week, they need dialysis. Each time, it is at least $10,000 to $15,000 for each treatment. That's just to purchase the things. For them, they have to purchase the things that they need to do it. Most of them have to take a taxi to carry them there. We know God knows our roads are bad, right? So they have to then charter a taxi. So it roughly costs them about $20,000 to $25,000 per treatment, and that's 2 times per week. Mr. Speaker, yes. I better get moving too, because I would die because I couldn't afford that. Our poor people out in the country, they can't afford that. No. Mr. Speaker, you would be surprised to know that when somebody ends up with end-stage renal disease, they literally pray for the next person to die. Because that's the only way they can get on the list. The list that is at KPHR Cornwall, they cannot get on the list unless one of the renal patients on that list dies. So here you have a Jamaican who is praying for another Jamaican to die so they don't have to die. This is the harsh reality of the situation. And this is something that we must confront full on, Mr. Speaker. And a future PNP administration will deal with it. Mr. Speaker, a future PNP administration will also look at strengthening and increasing access to drug on the VEN list, vital, essential and necessary, while increasing the number of drugs on that list. We will also meet with the stakeholders to ensure that pharmacists are able to procure necessary medication needed so that our people don't suffer from unavailability of medication. Mr. Speaker, one of the current things now, and you would have seen it in the media, is that we don't have some of the drugs, some of the medication in the country. The private pharmacists are asking why they are not allowed to procure some of these medications, because quite a lot of persons are going to our hospitals, going to our health centers, getting a prescription, and they cannot get the medication when they go to the pharmacist. The member from Southeast nods in approval, I'm sure. In relation to secondary health care, Mr. Speaker, we need to create more bed space. We need to create more bed space. The first thing that confronts anybody when they walk into a hospital currently is the fact that we don't have enough bed space. That is just the reality. We don't have enough bed space. Most of our facilities, Mr. Speaker, the accident and emergency room has been converted to a ward because you have a lot of inpatient persons who are admitted in the accident and emergency room. You have, therefore, Mr. Speaker, the persons who are now coming in and presenting who are just admitted, they are now forced to sit on a chair or sit on the floor. And that's what the councillor was bemoaning. That's the condition. When I go to St. Anne's Bay, that is the condition. So we need to create more bed space in our hospital facilities so that we can reduce those inconsistencies. But the priority, Mr. Speaker, has to be on prevention. The priority has to be on prevention to prevent the number of illnesses. I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, just saying it and doing it are two different things. Mr. Speaker, take for example, a lot has been said. Administration before, this administration, previous administration, from us in med school, our operating theaters. What is the good reason why our operating theaters don't operate 24 hours? All right. What could be the good reason why our operating theaters don't operate 24 hours? Mr. Speaker, somebody who ends up with an orthopedic injury, a bone fracture in one of the long bones in the limb, they are unable to work. The surgery gets pushed off, and they can't go back to work for another 6 weeks. That's decreasing production for the individual and for the country. We have these operating theaters, Mr. Speaker, and at nights, they're just there, only if an emergency comes in. I think, Mr. Speaker, in our major hospitals, we will have to design them so that we have sufficient space to deal with acute illnesses, and we will also need to have the other operating theaters that operate on a 24-hour cycle, Mr. Speaker, so that persons can get their surgeries done routinely. This is not something that is difficult for us to implement. Mr. Speaker, our hospitals, I wrap it up. Our hospitals, if we were able, the same thing, Mr. Speaker, with our hospitals, if we put all our staff on shift, all of our staff, Mr. Speaker, on shift, 8-hour shifts. So you have a shift that comes in the morning at 8 o'clock and they work up until 4 o'clock. Then another shift comes on at 4 o'clock and they work up until 12, and then the next shift comes on at 12 and they work to 8. We would drastically, Mr. Speaker, reduce the waiting time, the overcrowding, and all of these problems that we have in our institutions. Because at each time during the day, you will be able to have the full complement of staff at the hospital. These, Mr. Speaker, are practical solutions for complex problems. Mr. Speaker, we must assess you with a view to making the minor obstetric work more for the public and not for the doctors. More for the public and not for the doctors. I agree with the minister in the facilities that need to be upgraded, the different hospitals that need to be upgraded. This is something that needs to be done, and it is something that must be carried through irrespective of which political party forms the administration of the day. We must look at tax incentives for our private providers of health care. It is not possible for health care to be delivered by the state alone. It is not possible. We will have to look at our private-public partnerships to see how we can enable these private providers. So we can enable these private care providers to be able to partner and deliver health care. In relation to the staff, we must improve the middle management capacity. Currently, our parish managers, CEOs, and regional staff don't have the required. They can have greater capacity. We must send them for training in hospital management, improve the remuneration, and institute continuous evaluation. Finally, a PNP administration will implement a program for periodic audit and evaluation. This will benefit from bipartisan support, and a comprehensive maintenance program must be established in our facilities. Mr. Speaker, it is when we are ill that we are most vulnerable. It should not be that one's financial status should affect their ability to access care. But it also should not be that we implement policies that end up widening the inequality in access to quality health care. There is no prosperity without a healthy nation. I am not here to take credit or to blame anyone for what went on before me, but rather, Mr. Speaker, I'm here to assure the Jamaican people who are admitted and waiting for days to get a bed, those who can't afford the CT scans, those who have to wake up before dawn to try and get an early ticket to the clinics, those whose surgeries have to be postponed, those who are treated like second-class citizens in their own country. I'm here to assure them that it won't be long before the People's National Party is returned to power. So they must just hold on, because help is on its way. God bless you, and God bless Jamaica land. Help is on the way. Help is on the way. Help is on the way. Hold on. Help is on the way.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to seek your leave and that of members of this House for me to withdraw the resolution standing in my name at items 10 and 13 on the order of business.
Those in favor? Minister, advise on what item you're speaking. Those in favor? The minister is withdrawing.
Mr. No, I'm. Yeah. No, Mr. Yeah. They're there. They're there. They're distributed. No, I'm putting them. I took off the ones that were. So, Mr. Speaker, what happened? The regulations that were tabled earlier, we would have received some comments